Chapter 253. Renbochin heard the barking from afar and knew that the police were here. They were fast, much faster than he expected. He didn't know if the police solved the case quickly or if the Jean family was powerful. Even though he didn't make any arrangements, he had changed cars a few times. It would take some time for the police to track his route, right? Renbochin sat on the rock and pondered. He couldn't just leave like this, right? Even if he were to leave, he had to let them know that he had been here. Thinking of this, he took out a pen and paper from his bag, wrote a note, and pressed it on the rock. Then, he disappeared before the other party saw him. Half a day later, a team of policemen followed the police dogs to this place and saw a note. The handwriting on the note looked like it was scratched by a chicken's claw. It took them a long time to recognize the words on the note. "Comrades, you have worked hard." Everyone flew into a rage after reading the words on the note. Everyone was gnashing their teeth. This murderer was too daring and arrogant. This was simply a provocation. However, the police dogs only circled around this area and couldn't detect any aura anymore. It was as if the person had disappeared from this place. Hundreds of police officers searched the mountain for 5 days, but in the end, they couldn't even find a strand of hair. Only that note made everyone gnash their teeth in anger, swearing to arrest this guy and bring him to justice. Sigh. When Renbochin returned to Pingle Park, he started to sigh again. He threw his things on the ground, took out the arrow, and played a sad song, "Trouble Caused by the Moon." The guards outside looked as if they had seen a ghost. "I admit that it's all because of the arrow. That kind of night is too beautiful, and you are too gentle." After he finished singing, Renbochin felt the knot in his heart lighten a little. He didn't provoke anyone, but he abandoned his family and business to become a wanted criminal. He even had to hide in the mountain for 2 days. When he was hungry, he ate braised beef. When he was thirsty, he drank ergotu. It could be said that he was miserable. After sighing for a long time, Renbochin washed his face, changed his clothes, and ran to see the Empress. "Your Majesty, all the clothes you left at home are gone." Renbochin sighed when he saw the Empress. The Empress raised her eyebrows. She liked many of those clothes. Furthermore, who dared to touch her things? Even the house is gone. "What's the matter?" the Empress asked coldly. From her tone, one could tell that she was very unhappy. "I was too careless. I didn't think that the other party would stop after attacking me last time and come directly to my house. I had no choice but to kill him. However, I also became a fugitive because of this. Now, I have a home that I can't return to, and I have to hide from place to place. Fortunately, I saw a musical instrument shop on my way to escape. I remembered that I promised Your Majesty to bring back an arrow, so I didn't dare to throw it away even when I was escaping. Fortunately, he had returned safely. However, I'm afraid I'll be hunted down again when I return." Renbochin looked aggrieved and took out the arrow at the right time. This time around, he didn't forget to play it. The Empress's heart softened when she saw his appearance and said, "Forget it, it's good that you are back. I will go with you next time and see what they can do." At present, Renbochin wasn't in the mood to play Pomp and Circumstance, but he was in the mood to play Second Spring Reflecting the Moon. Fortunately, the Empress didn't mention it and was very considerate of him. After 2 days, Renbochin's mood was finally better. After all, things had already come to this point, and it was useless to sigh. Being a fugitive wasn't a serious matter for Renbochin now. He could teleport once every 2 to 3 days, and it would take about 10 days for him to appear again. It wouldn't be easy for the other party to catch him. Even if he was caught, as long as he wasn't killed on the spot, he could bring the Empress back and directly break out of prison. However, he couldn't stay in the country anymore and could only go abroad. In fact, it wasn't that there was no other way. For example, he could go to a big country for plastic surgery and change his appearance. However, it was hard to say how the Empress would react when she saw his completely new face. Renbochin thought about it and decided to continue to escape with this face. On the third day, Renbochin and the Empress sat in the garden. It was a sunny morning. In the distance, Qin Yuan, Hong Yuan, and the two imperial guards looked curiously at the strange thing in Renbochin's hand and kept guessing what he was going to do. The Empress's face was full of anticipation. She also didn't know what an Arab performance would be like. However, when Renbochin said that he would play it for her, she was full of anticipation and felt a little sweet in her heart. Renbochin struck a pose with a face full of confidence. He had trained hard to play the Little Huxian version of Pomp and Circumstance. Then, he took a deep breath. When the delicate moans of the arrow came out, the Empress immediately got goosebumps all over her body, and her eyes widened. The surrounding imperial guards tensed up and looked as if they had seen a ghost. What was this thing? It gave people the feeling that the arrow in Renbochin's hand had turned into a spirit. The delicate moans were full of enchantment. If one had to describe it, it would be coquettish. It was simply too coquettish. Renbochin looked intoxicated. As the music progressed, it finally became a little more normal. However, even the cheerful rhythm at the climax was full of a seductive aura. Then, 1, 2, 3, 4, the delicate moans were repeated again. The Empress exerted force and directly grabbed a piece of the stone table in front of her, but she didn't even feel it. She was really shocked. Her face was filled with shock and a little bewilderment. Even when she was facing the 9 pavilions, she didn't have such a huge emotional fluctuation. Her heart, which was usually as calm as a lake, was now like a landslide and a tsunami. She couldn't calm down even for a moment with the sound of the arrow. When the Empress heard the delicate moans, the veins on her forehead started to bulge. Qin Yuan and Hong Yuan were already stunned. Both of them looked at Renbochin with their mouths wide open. Those imperial guards looked as if they were constipated, and their whole bodies were trembling. Before Renbochin could finish playing the piece that he was so proud of, the stone table had already started to fall piece by piece. The Empress subconsciously used her fingers to scratch the surface of the stone table. Half of the stone table that was half a foot thick had disappeared. Renbochin only played halfway before abruptly stopping. He had a look of longing on his face. This was because the Little Huxian version only stopped here. It was said that the neighbor of Little Huxian smashed the door and barged in. Renbochin felt that he had never performed so smoothly before. He was so engrossed in his performance today. He opened his eyes and looked at the Empress with a face full of admiration. Your Majesty, why are there blue veins on your forehead? The Empress snatched the arrow and threw it dozens of meters away like a concealed weapon to the imperial guards. She gritted her teeth and said, "Suppress this thing under the plaza in front of the palace." The 2 imperial guards felt as if they had been granted amnesty. Without saying a word, they carried the arrow and dashed out. Chapter 254. Halfway up the mountain, it was pitch black. Only the dim moon in the sky shone a little silver light. 2 people were standing there. One of them was squatting in a Slavic posture while the other was standing straight like a javelin. The night wind blew her long hair. "I've asked someone to watch your family. The police are keeping an eye on you. Be more careful. Try not to call home." There were 2 messages. The first one was about Jean Wen and Jean Wu's possible locations at night. The other one was about this. Sigh. Renbochin wanted to sigh again. Every time he thought about this, he felt like he was constipated. After a while, Renbochin stood up and looked into the distance with a solemn face. "Your Majesty, let's go." Like a chick, the Empress carried him by the back of his neck and leaped into the distance. After leaping for nearly 100 meters, she landed on the ground. The wind blew on Renbochin's face. Even though he was being carried by the neck like a chick, Renbochin still managed to maintain his solemn face. Feeling the oncoming gale, he was inspired to write a poem and silently recited, "There will be a time when the wind breaks the waves." The last sentence was to hang the sail to save the vast sea. However, Renbochin was now the one being held by the Empress, fluttering in the wind. Moving at a speed of 300 miles per hour on the mountain, the Empress leaped more than 10 meters into the air. This was really too exciting. Even though he knew that nothing would happen, Renbochin's heart was still racing like an elevator following the Empress's movements. It was 9:00 in the evening. With the Empress's speed, she could cover a distance of more than 200 kilometers in an hour. Renbochin had a lingering wish. It would be great if the Empress could carry him on her back. It would be much better than being carried like a flag fluttering in the wind. Jinwen put down the document in his hand, took off his reading glasses, and rubbed his temples. "Is there still no news of that kid?" Jinwen asked. "Yes, Brother Wen," a man in a shirt standing beside him replied. Jinwen rubbed his temples and picked up another piece of paper. On it was a photo of a young man. This was all of Renbochin's information. He had seen it more than once. Up until now, he was still a little surprised that such a person could actually kill his third brother and 3 other subordinates. Also, where did that brat go? It had been half a month. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. It had been so long, but they still couldn't find him. Third brother's wife was making a fuss every day, and the people below were also restless. If he really let this kid run away, his face would be thrown into the ditch. The police are still watching his hometown. Jinwen asked. "Yes, but they are about to withdraw," the man said again. "When the time comes, I'll arrange for his family to die a good death. Don't be too quick. Take it slow." "I don't believe that kid won't show up," Jinwen said casually. Killing someone was difficult, but sometimes it was also very simple. A simple accident was all that mattered. After saying that, Jinwen took out a box of tea leaves from his drawer and placed it in a covered bowl. The man in the shirt quickly boiled a pot of water, but Jinwen still made the tea himself. This was his habit. At that moment, the window opposite Jinwen's room suddenly exploded. Then, 2 figures appeared in the room. The sudden change stunned Jinwen. One had to know that this was the 17th floor. How could someone break the window and come in? However, he didn't slow down. He immediately took out a gun from the drawer and pointed it at the other party. Only then did he carefully identify the 2 figures. One of them was a man. He wasn't very eye-catching, but he looked somewhat familiar. The other was the woman beside him. He couldn't take his eyes off her. "Brother Wen, it's that kid." The man in the shirt cried out in surprise. A little doubt emerged in Jinwen's mind. That kid. Then, he realized who it was. It was the kid with the surname Ren who killed his third brother. After taking a closer look at the 2 of them, he didn't see any ropes on their bodies. This made him a little puzzled as to how they came in. However, a cold smile hung on his face. "Although I have always hoped that you would appear in front of me, I didn't expect it to be like this." As he spoke, he pulled the trigger. 6 gunshots rang out in succession. 4 of them were shot at the woman in red, and the other 2 were shot at Renbochin. It couldn't be helped. The appearance of these 2 people was too strange. If he didn't beat them half to death first, he wouldn't be able to rest easy. However, the red-clothed woman's arm seemed to shake, but it also seemed like she didn't move at all. Everything was just an illusion. On the other hand, the 2 of them were still standing there unscathed. Renbochin widened his eyes in shock. This old bastard was actually more ruthless than him. Why didn't he say anything and just open fire? Jin Wen was even more shocked than Renbachyan. He had fired all the bullets in his pistol in one go, but the two of them were still unscathed. What the hell? Jin Wen immediately had this thought in his mind, and his forehead was covered in cold sweat. The Empress looked calm and collected. With a wave of her palm, more than 10 bullets flew out. The man standing a meter away from Jin Wen was instantly beaten into a sieve. Zixiao, your kung fu is really unparalleled in the world. Renbachyan gave her a thumbs up. The Empress's face turned even darker and her eyes turned cold. She subconsciously rubbed her fingers and wished she could throw it again. The man's body was covered in blood, and he fell to the ground with a thud. Both of you, we can talk about anything. Jin Wen looked panicked. Even though he was used to great storms, he couldn't help but panic in this situation. The other party wasn't even afraid of guns. Who said that this guy was an ordinary person? Renbachyan saw the panic on Jin Wen's face. As he spoke, he took out a magazine from the drawer and reloaded it into his gun. It was as if the gun in his hand gave him a sense of security. Pow! Renbachyan raised his gun and blood immediately burst out from Jin Wen's head. Renbachyan looked constipated. I was aiming at his shoulder. I haven't finished talking. Is it settled? The Empress turned to look at him with a questioning look. We're still missing Jin Woo. He might be on the 17th floor of this building or somewhere else. Renbachyan looked innocent. He had something to say for a long time, but he didn't even have the chance to say it. After a while, Renbachyan found Jin Woo in a high-end residential area. At that time, he was doing something indescribable with a woman. Their loud and resounding screams were heard directly. The Empress had just landed, saw the situation in the house, and heard the screams. She felt as if a layer of ice had been scraped off her face. Without saying anything, she struck Jin Woo and the woman with her palm. Before they could react, they were stuck to the wall. Renbachyan looked at the wall full of blood and felt sullen. Why is it so difficult to say something? People say that not returning to one's hometown after becoming rich is like walking at night in brocade clothes. It's the same for revenge. At least let me finish my words. In the end, Renbachyan had no choice but to find a piece of paper in the room and write his words on it for others to see. It was still written in chicken claw-like handwriting. People say that the most important thing for a family is to be neat and tidy. Now, we're all together. He placed the paper directly on the bed. Renbachyan's face finally revealed a satisfied look. Next, he searched the room and found Jin Woo's son, who was beaten to death by Renbachyan in the living room. Zixiao, you are blushing. Renbachyan was carried by the Empress and shuttled between the tall buildings. He turned his head to look at the Empress and said this abruptly. The Empress panicked when she heard this. Her hand trembled, and Renbachyan fell with a blood-curdling scream. Your Majesty, save me. Renbachyan looked at the ground that was getting closer and closer to him, and his voice turned into a blood-curdling scream. When he was grabbed by the Empress, his heart almost jumped out of his chest. No one would know if they were free falling from such a high altitude. What's that sound? More than one person in the room heard the blood-curdling scream outside, but there was nothing when they looked out of the window. Renbachyan lay on the rooftop and gasped for breath. He was really scared just now. If the Empress was a little slower, he would have become a meat patty. The Empress stood at the edge of the rooftop and looked down. She thought of something she saw just now and panicked. Zixiao. I was scared to death just now. Renbachyan lay on the ground and didn't want to move at all. He was really scared just now. The Empress acted as if she didn't hear what he said. After a long time, she finally calmed down. She turned her head and looked at Renbachyan coldly. Where are we going next? There are still a few places. We are still short of 4 people. Renbochin lay on the ground with one hand covering his heart. Point the way. Following which, the 2 of them went to a few more places and finally completed the mission. Jin Wen, Jin Woo, and their wives and children were finally reunited. Although it sounded a little cruel, Renbochin felt that it would be cruel to himself if he left one of them alive. As for the rest, he didn't need to care about them as they would be in a mess. Late at night, Renbochin and the Empress stood on the rooftop of a building. The place opposite them was a very comical place for him. At the city police station. Renbochin sat at the edge of the rooftop and took out his phone to make a call. He had just swiped the phone. Hello. The phone rang twice before it was picked up. It was Papa Chin, who sounded very tired. Dad. Renbochin said softly. Bochin. Where are you? How are you now? What exactly happened? The police said that you killed someone. Upon hearing Renbochin's voice, Papa Chin immediately lowered his voice and asked anxiously. Meanwhile, at the police station of T City and S City. That fellow has appeared. Following a shout and a wave of panic, everyone crowded around the computer. Each and every one of them had a look of surprise on their faces. That bastard had finally appeared. Nowadays, it wasn't as troublesome to use a surveillance van like in the past. They just had to think of a way to plant a virus in the phone. I'm fine, don't worry, Renbochin said in a relaxed tone. It's good that you are fine. If you are wrongly accused, then turn yourself in. Your mother and I will definitely help you clear your name. Papa Chin hesitated for a while and said in a deep voice. Until now, he still didn't believe that his son would kill someone. In his heart, Renbochin started his business last year. His conditions were getting better and better, and he even gave a large sum of money to his family. Why would he give up such a bright future and kill someone? I am really wrongly accused. Renbochin felt wronged. Upon hearing this, Papa Chin immediately felt that his son was indeed wrongly accused. His face revealed a look of surprise. Renbochin could even hear his mother's panting from the other end of the phone. Don't worry, both of you. I'm fine. I know the rest and it's not convenient for me to say too much. Just know that I'm doing well. Renbochin continued to speak in a relaxed tone. Renbochin spoke to his parents for 2 minutes before hanging up the phone and throwing it on the rooftop behind him. At the opposite police station, a large number of people had already rushed out. A few minutes later, the police rushed up to the rooftop and only saw a phone on the floor. The rest was empty. They searched the entire building for a whole night but still couldn't find any trace of Renbochin. The phone that Renbochin used belonged to Jin Jun's son. It was very easy to find him. When the police arrived at Jin Jun's house, they only saw 3 corpses. Following that was Jin Wen, Jin Woo, and the note on the bed in Jin Woo's room. People say that the most important thing for a family is to be in order. Now, we are all in order. When they saw this note, it was unknown how many people gnashed their teeth in hatred. A total of 11 members of the Jin family were killed in different places in one night. This wasn't just an ordinary murder case. Furthermore, there was a note left behind by the murderer. It was simply showing off and provoking. Vile, simply too vile and insane. Chapter 255. A young man with glasses was browsing the largest video website when he suddenly noticed a video titled "Cultivators Really Exist" that had just been uploaded half a minute ago. Out of curiosity, he clicked on the video. The picture was a little blurry, which was caused by the phone shooting at night. Judging from the opposite floor in the video, the position of the person who shot the video should be between the 7th and 9th floor. At the same time, a miserable voice came from the speaker, "Help." It sounded like a chicken being slaughtered. Then, he saw a man falling from the sky on the screen, which made his heart skip a beat. He couldn't help but curse, "Immortal cultivator, my ass." Someone obviously fell from the building. At this moment, the figure that was falling suddenly disappeared. He retreated and looked carefully again. He saw that two people suddenly appeared on the opposite wall of the tall building and then disappeared again. One of them was the person who fell from the building, and the other seemed to be a woman. "It's fake, right?" He muttered subconsciously and was ready to refresh the video to watch it again. However, when he refreshed it again, he found that the video was lost. Damn, it can't be real, right? If he had thought it was fake before, then the video had disappeared so quickly, which made his imagination run wild. Conspiracy theories had always been believed by many people. "Boss, look at this video." As a young man called out, a man in his 30s walked behind him and watched. It was the video that had just been uploaded half a minute ago, but the clarity was much higher. Especially after the brightness was adjusted, the two figures in the picture were even more conspicuous. "It's fake," the man in his 30s concluded at a glance. "Boss, this hasn't been processed. It looks real." "Impossible," the man in his 30s concluded. In the video, a woman could be seen rushing at the falling figure at a super high speed. She lifted his clothes and brought him to the opposite wall. Then, she stepped on the wall and rushed up diagonally. This was simply impossible. The speed at which a person fell from a high altitude was about 23 meters per second. The speed of the woman in the video was far faster than that. It was not something that a human could achieve. After watching the video 3 times, the man in his 30s looked solemn. Although his reason told him that it was impossible, everything in the video was too real. Most importantly, this video was taken with a mobile phone and had not been modified by any software. In other words, it was very likely to be true. The next morning, this video and the case in S City were spread to some people's desks. Both happened in the same place. In the case of Severny, 11 people died in different locations within an hour. This was not something that 1 or 2 people could do. At the very least, several groups of people had to work together. But at every crime scene, there were only traces of the same man and woman. Coupled with this video, it immediately made some people feel as if they had discovered something incredible, something that could change the perception of mankind. Find him. Don't use force. Talk to him first. Such an order and the information of the 2 people were sent to a certain department. One of them had detailed information, while the other only had an ID card. The boundless horizon is my love, flowers are blooming at the foot of the rolling green mountains. A dilapidated off-road vehicle was running wildly on the grassland. At present, Renbachien and the Empress were in MG Nation in the north. It was more than 600 kilometers away, and both of them had rushed here in one night. Then, they randomly found an unlucky guy, knocked him out, and threw him to the side of the road. Now, Renbachien had already given up. He had already done vile things, and there was no longer any psychological pressure to do other things. In any case, if he was caught, he would be dragged out and shot for 5 minutes. In any case, they wouldn't be able to catch him. In any case, even if they caught him, he could still escape from prison. Renbachien's current target was the country in the north that was known as a fighting nation. It was a country that would duel with bears and beat them until they cried. When he arrived there, he would head west toward Europe. At that time, he might stop at a country in Eastern Europe or go to South America. He heard that it was more chaotic there. To ordinary people, chaos was a terrible thing, but to him, it wasn't a big deal as long as he didn't get shot in the back. Every 7 days, he could increase his strength by 15 kilograms. Now, his strength had already reached 225 kilograms. In addition, he was ravaged by that little girl with 2 buns on her head every day. Renbachien felt that he could survive anywhere. Moreover, he was still getting stronger. Even if he couldn't reach the level of the Empress, he could still do whatever he wanted once he reached the level of the winged cavalry. The air here is much better, the Empress said casually as she looked at the boundless grassland outside. In Deo, there were many places like this. Furthermore, the air here was even better. However, compared to S-City, this place could already be considered as heaven. Your Majesty, do you want to try driving? Ren Baqin suggested. In any case, it was impossible to drive over such a boundless grassland. Why not let the Empress have some fun and treat it as a go-kart? All right. The Empress didn't really care. It was fine to give it a try. After Ren Baqin taught the Empress how to turn, the gear, the accelerator, and the brake, the two of them changed positions. The Empress was fully focused on the front. She stepped on the brake with one foot. When she realized that the car wasn't moving, she stepped on the accelerator as if nothing had happened and stepped on it to the end. Ren Baqin, who was caught off guard, was almost thrown into the back seat. Si Xiao. You scared me. Ren Baqin sat up straight and patted his chest. What do we do now? The Empress suddenly asked. Her voice was very calm and steady. What do you mean? Ren Baqin turned his head and looked at the Empress with a puzzled look. He saw that the Empress was holding onto the steering wheel. There was nothing wrong with it. The problem was that only the steering wheel was in the Empress's hands. She actually pulled it out. Ren Baqin stared blankly. He looked at the boundless grassland in front of them and then looked at the steering wheel in the Empress's hands. Finally, he sighed and said, let's do it this way. In any case, it's a grassland and the car won't overturn. If the car really overturns, Zixiao, you must help me out. Half an hour later, Ren Baqin looked at the off-road vehicle that had rolled on the ground for tens of meters before finally collapsing to one side. He then looked at the surroundings. Where could he find another car now? After being carried by the Empress and fluttering in the wind for half an hour, the two of them sat in the off-road vehicle again. This vehicle was slightly newer than the previous one, but this time around, Ren Baqin wasn't prepared to let the Empress try a go-kart again. After another day, the two of them had already arrived at Ren Baqin's original destination, our nation. At night, Ren Baqin and the Empress walked on the streets of an unfamiliar city. They were surrounded by tall Caucasians, which made the Empress frown from time to time. The different races of people around her made her feel somewhat uncomfortable. Even if Great Xia and Deo were two different nations, it still wouldn't make her feel this way. Ren Baqin looked around and saw that all the words were indecipherable. The people around him also spoke in a language that he couldn't understand. This caused him to be at a loss for a moment. Suddenly, a bald burly man took 2 quick steps forward and stuck close to Ren Baqin's back. He placed a sharp object on Ren Baqin's waist and said fiercely. Chapter 256. Ren Baqin was at a loss and did not know what the other party was talking about. When the other party saw that Ren Baqin did not respond, his face became even more ferocious. At the same time, another person came over and stretched out his hand to pull the Empress into the alley at the side. Before he could touch the Empress, he was sent flying and spat out a pile of broken internal organs in midair. The bald man behind Ren Baqin had a ferocious look on his face. He exerted force in his hand and expected to feel the dagger stabbing into a human body. However, the dagger in his hand was caught by something and could not move at all. Unknowingly, the Empress had grabbed the dagger in his hand. With a gentle twist and a push, the dagger directly pierced into the bald man's abdomen. Following which, the Empress slapped the burly man's head. The contents of his head immediately spurted out from his nose, mouth, and ears. By the time Ren Baqin reacted, the dust had already settled. Ren Baqin turned his head to look behind him and then looked at the calm Empress. He immediately covered his face with a face full of sorrow. They had just run over from China. Before they could even see what the first city was like, the two of them were going to become wanted criminals in our nation again. Their days were simply unbearable. One of his eyes scanned the area outside his palm. There was actually no one nearby. There were only a few figures in the distance. There were also cars driving over from afar. However, the distance was too far and he could not see clearly what was happening here. This wasn't like China. Even in a small county, the streets would be filled with uncles and aunties at night. This place was much more deserted than China. Ren Baqian immediately rejoiced. Zixiao, drag them into the alley. Otherwise, we will be hunted down again. The Empress rolled her eyes at Ren Baqian. She was a little dissatisfied with his instructions. However, in a flash, she dragged the man who was sent flying by her over. Ren Baqian also dragged the bald man on the ground into the alley. In such a dark corner, it was very difficult for outsiders to notice. This made Ren Baqian feel more at ease. First, he ransacked the wallets of the two men. Their wallets added up to a total of more than 3,000 rubles. Ren Baqian did not understand the exchange rate and did not know the prices here. He did not even know if it was enough for the two of them to have a meal. However, he still took it first. This time, he only had 20,000 rubles in his pocket and had not had the opportunity to exchange them yet. Ren Baqian asked the Empress to send the two of them to the rooftop. He stood at the entrance of the alley and scanned the surroundings. There weren't any surveillance cameras in the vicinity, and no one noticed what happened just now. It could be considered a silver lining in this misfortune. There were bloodstains on the ground from when the bald man was dragged in, but it would take at least 2 or 3 days to find the corpse on the roof. By that time, he would have already left. Ren Baqian turned around and looked at the Empress. The Empress's eyes were clear and bright. At first, Ren Baqian wanted to advise her not to be in a hurry to make a move. However, after thinking that the other party was already holding a knife at his waist, he decided to just let it be. Previously, when she was fighting with Turkey, the Empress had never wantonly used her martial arts. Presumably, she knew what she was doing. Are you cold? Ren Baqian asked. It was currently summer in July, but the temperature at night should be less than 20 degrees Celsius. Ren Baqian could feel a trace of coolness even though he was wearing a short-sleeved shirt. As for the Empress, this kind of temperature didn't affect her at all. However, he still wanted to ask something. He felt somewhat apologetic that the Empress had helped him kill people and accompanied him in being hunted. The Empress turned around and looked at him. Under the dim light of the night, the Empress's eyes were very bright. Ren Baqian felt that they were like stars. Where are we going next? The Empress asked. Let's find something to eat first. Ren Baqian touched his pockets. Now, he was only left with money. However, he didn't know if the shops here accepted RMB. They found a roadside restaurant and ate Russian stewed meat, roasted potatoes, and a bottle of vodka. The taste was a little strange and she wasn't used to it. However, the Empress liked the vodka very much. After this meal, he was only left with 200 out of the 3,000 rubles that he looted from them previously. It wasn't even enough for accommodation. Furthermore, it was obvious that the Empress wasn't full. However, when Ren Baqian took out the RMB, she immediately shook her head. This made him feel somewhat helpless. I might as well rob someone. Ren Baqian pondered in his heart. This idea was just a thought. In the end, he didn't put it into action. Ren Baqian felt that he still had a bottom line. In the end, the two of them stayed by the riverside for a night. The next morning, they went to the bank to exchange some rubles and found a place to rest for the day. At night, they left the city and found a secluded corner before returning to Dayo. 3 days after the two of them left, 3 people came to this city to inquire about the Empress. After all, the Empress's appearance and red dress made her very recognizable. It was very easy for a group of people to inquire about the two of them. Furthermore, they also noticed a strange case in this city. One of the people seemed to have been hit by a car and his internal organs were almost all smashed into pieces. The other person looked fine on the surface, but his brain suffered a heavy blow. Brain juice directly spurted out from his 5 orifices. The strangest thing was that the two people's corpses were found on the rooftop. Some of their internal organs were found on the roadside near the building. However, there were only traces of one person being dragged into an alley. How exactly the two people ended up on the rooftop and how they died had become a mystery. This strange case had spread far and wide in this small city. It had become the topic of many people's leisure time. When the few of them heard about the two people's deaths, they immediately thought of the man named Jean Wu from a few days ago. His entire body was embedded in the wall and couldn't even be pulled out. Even though the conditions of the deceased were different, there was one thing in common. That was, it didn't seem like something a human could do. After reporting this discovery to the higher-ups, the three of them followed the direction in which the two people left. After passing by the place where the two people disappeared, they kept moving forward, and forward. Then, they realized that the two people had actually disappeared into thin air. When Renbao saw the surroundings of Yangxin Palace Hall, he suddenly felt as if he had returned home. After such a long time, he almost didn't know where his home was anymore. This was especially so after he became a wanted criminal on Earth. Your Majesty, it has been hard on you these days, Renbao turned his head and said softly to the Empress. The Empress returned to the couch in a flash and stretched her body, highlighting her beautiful figure. She fiercely glared at Renbao, who was staring at her, before saying, "It's just a casual attack from a clay chicken or a pottery dog. It's not hard on me." Indeed, on Earth, the Empress's strength made her like a god, and there was almost nothing to be afraid of. Renbao casually sat down next to the Empress, bent his legs, and asked curiously, "Your Majesty, do you feel like a god on Earth? Everything is like an ant that can be destroyed with a flip of your hand." Oh. After hearing Renbao's question, the Empress fell into deep thought. After a long time, she said, "Just like what you said, we are good at different things. The ordinary aboriginals may seem very powerful to you, but to me, they are no different from the people on your side. On the contrary, I rather admire some of your things. Knowledge is power, I also agree with this saying." Renbao laughed after hearing what the Empress said. The Empress was much more clear-headed than he had imagined. He had thought that after going to Earth so many times and being surrounded by ordinary people without any power, she would have such thoughts. If it were him, with such power, he would be able to destroy everything around him with a flip of his hand. Perhaps, he would become so arrogant that he couldn't even recognize himself. In the past, he wouldn't even dare to think about the recent events. Now, not only did he do it, but he also didn't feel any psychological burden. At most, he would feel a little sad because he couldn't go home and had to flee. There was a saying that he had seen in movies in the past, "With great power comes great responsibility." Chapter 257. Somewhere in Great Xia, the cold wind was whistling, and the surrounding forest was covered in white. Chia! 7 or 8 horsemen were galloping on the official road at full speed, and the pedestrians on the road all gave way to them. The man in front was dressed in embroidered clothes with a fur cloak draped over his shoulders. He looked young, and his face was cold. The people behind him were all dressed in tight clothes and cloaks, and all of them had a small stream embroidered on their chests. This was the symbol of the Lian family, and anyone with some knowledge in the nearby prefectures could recognize it. After all, the Lian family was considered the #1 power in Zhejiang Prefecture. At this moment, other than the man in embroidered clothes who still looked cold, the rest of the people looked relaxed. This mission didn't require much effort, and the Lian family gave them a lot of points. Many people were thinking about whether they should exchange the points for money or exchange them for a martial arts manual. Just as they turned around to call, the man in embroidered clothes suddenly felt alarmed. He pressed his palms on the back of the horse, and his whole body flew out like a rock spreading its wings. At the same time, dozens of arrows were shot from both sides, and all of them were surrounded. The remaining 6 or 7 horsemen roared and wanted to draw their swords, but they were all hit by the arrows and fell off their horses. Only 2 of them managed to escape with injuries on their bodies. "Who's there? Come out!" The man in embroidered clothes shouted in the air, drew his sword, and pounced on the figures that appeared on both sides. "Zhu Qingjun, you'll stay here today." 2 figures followed the shout and flew forward. One of them was holding a serrated knife, and the back of the knife was serrated, which could be used to block people's weapons. The other person was holding a short stick. Zhu Qingjun's expression changed when he saw the weapons in their hands. He knew both of them, and they were both from the Lian family. Among the 4 remaining consecrators of the Lian family, only the 2 of them were from the Lian family. The one holding the serrated knife was called Lian Peng, and the other was called Lian Zhan. Zhu Qingjun blocked the long knife with his sword, and focused all his attention on the short stick. As expected, when it was about to get close to him, the short stick suddenly elongated, and a steel-all-like point emerged from the front end. It shook out 6 plum blossoms in the air, covering Zhu Qingjun's entire body from top to bottom. As expected, Zhu Qingjun thought to himself. If he didn't happen to know the secret of his opponent's short rod, he would have fallen into his trap. A series of clanging sounds could be heard in the air. Zhu Qingjun exchanged a few moves with the other 2. Even though he was fighting 1 against 2, he was only slightly at a disadvantage. Your strength has actually improved again. Considering your age, you are indeed a talent. Lian Zhan's expression changed in the air, and he could not help but praise. He did not expect that the 2 of them could only barely suppress him in a single exchange. "A living talent is a talent," Lian Peng said coldly. "You all." Zhu Qingjun was initially puzzled and angry. They were obviously all consecrated members of the Lian clan, so why did they suddenly attack him? Moreover, it seemed like they were determined to kill him. But at this moment, something suddenly flashed through his mind. "You're here with the 7 branches sect to kill me?" Zhu Qingjun shouted angrily after he landed. "Go down and ask the King of Hell," Lian Peng said coldly. After Zhu Qingjun landed on the ground, he scanned his surroundings and saw dozens of people surrounding him with knives in their hands. Lian Qizhi sent people to assassinate Qi Zixiao's lover, luring Qi Zixiao to the 9 pavilions. In the end, the 9 pavilions were destroyed, and Emperor Xiao lost over 10,000 elite soldiers. "Do you all think that you can live after killing me? Lian Qizhi killed me today, and tomorrow, it will be your turn." Hearing this, the faces of the 2 knights who were lucky enough to survive immediately turned pale and filled with despair. Lian Peng's and Lian Zhan's expressions changed drastically. Then, Lian Peng sneered and said, "These people can't hear anything. You are wasting your efforts. As for the 2 of us, you don't have to worry about us." Zhu Qingjun glanced at the people around him and asked, "Do you all think you can keep me here? What if you include me?" A voice came from another direction. "Lian Qizhi. How dare you appear?" Zhu Qingjun gritted his teeth and looked over. "You are at the peak of the man-will level." Halfway through his sentence, he suddenly froze, and swallowed the remaining half of the sentence, "I'll kill you first," into his stomach. Lian Qizhi's joints were cracking, and his qi and blood were rolling in his body like thunder. His aura was rising steadily from the peak of the man-will level, to the initial stage of the earth-will level, to the intermediate stage of the earth-will level, all the way to the advanced stage of the earth-embryo level. "Why do you think I am the master of the Lian family?" Lian Qizhi was all smiles. At this moment, he was 3 inches taller than before. Zhu Qingjun was speechless. Lian Qizhi had always revealed his strength at the peak of the man-will level to the outside world, even though many people felt that he wasn't qualified to be the master. Unexpectedly, he was the most powerful person in the Lian family. Now, you can go in peace. It's a pity that you don't have any family members. Otherwise, I could help you take good care of them. But it's good that you don't have to worry about being alone. Lian Qizhi smiled. I'll kill you. Zhu Qingjun looked like he was going to die. There were 3 Earth Will experts, and one of them was even at the advanced stage of the Earth Will level. He definitely couldn't escape. He raised his qi and blood to the maximum and pounced on Lian Qizhi. Even if he died, he wanted to bite off a piece of flesh from Lian Qizhi's body. Lian Qizhi flipped his hands and shot out 13 silver beads in a row. All of them hit the body of Zhu Qingjuan's sword. When the last bead hit the sword, a dang sound was heard. The sword in Zhu Qingjuan's hand broke, and his shoulder was pierced by the remaining force of the last bead. His whole body rolled backward and landed on the ground. Zhu Qingjun covered his shoulder with one hand and was overwhelmed with shock. His sword was considered a rare weapon that could even split a boulder in his hand. Yet, it was actually broken by the opponent's silver beads. Lian Qizhi was so strong. You can die in peace now, Lian Qizhi said softly as he didn't chase after Zhu Qingjun. Just when Zhu Qingjun knew that he was going to die for sure and everyone thought that the outcome was a foregone conclusion, a burst of applause suddenly came from a tree not far away. Everyone was startled by the applause, especially Lian Qizhi. There was actually someone hiding in the vicinity without him noticing. Who exactly was it? They saw a young scholar sitting on the tree with a bookcase on his back. He looked like a scholar who was rushing to take an exam. After carefully sensing his aura, he wasn't much different from an ordinary person. However, no one realized that there was someone up there. Even a fool would know that he wasn't an ordinary person. At this moment, they didn't dare to act rashly. When I saw you guys coming over half a day ago, I already felt that it would be fun. I didn't expect it to be this fun. This is really too interesting. Qi Zixia will definitely be very happy to receive you guys as a gift. The scholar was all smiles. Who are you? Lian Qizhi was flustered, but he forced himself to remain calm on the surface. Sword, come. The scholar didn't reply. Instead, he stretched out his hand towards the sky and let out a long cry. You are the sword master. Lian Qizhi's facial expression changed. The other party was actually an extremely rare sword master. Furthermore, he didn't have his sword with him. Lian Qizhi immediately felt extremely regretful. 18 silver beads in his hand shot towards the other party's body with a piercing sound. Io, don't be anxious. The scholar seemed to have missed a step, and his entire body fell towards the bottom of the tree. At the same time, a long sword sneakily flew out of the forest and directly landed in the hands of the falling scholar. The scholar was Ning Kaichen and the sword was Lu Zhu. Ever since the last time she went to Dao, Lu Zhu had been sneaking around like a thief. After a while, Ning Kaichen grabbed Zhu Qingjun with one hand and ran for his life like a happy rabbit. The bookcase behind him was inlaid with a whole row of silver beads. If it was taken off, it would be worth at least dozens of taels of silver. Lian Qizhi's silver bullets could even penetrate a 1-foot-thick tree, but they couldn't penetrate this simple and crude bookcase. When I heard you say, receive you guys as a gift, I thought you were going to tie them up and give them to Qi Zixiao. Zhu Qingjun endured the pain in his body and couldn't help but say. He didn't care whether the other party would answer him or not. Anyway, he just wanted to speak now. At this moment, Zhu Qingjun had a few more injuries on his body, especially on his legs. When Ning Kaichen appeared, he thought he had met an expert. He didn't expect the other party to actually grab him and run away. He should have thanked the other party for saving him, but he actually used him to block the silver bullets. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been so badly injured and his legs were badly mutilated. Anyway, I can just hand you over to Qi Zixiao. Why do I have to do it myself? Ning Caichen's forehead was sweating. When he heard the shouting coming from behind, he quickened his pace. Chapter 258. A month later, a coachman with grizzled hair and a bald and ugly old horse pulled the carriage slowly into Lan City. Ning Caichen opened the curtains and looked outside. There wasn't much difference from when he first arrived. Everywhere was filled with simple-looking aboriginals who revealed ferocious expressions when they saw outsiders. Zhu Qingjun was lying beside him. The injuries on other parts of his body were not obvious from the outside, but his legs were still tightly wrapped with a white cloth. Occasionally, when the carriage shook too much, faint blood would seep into the white cloth. An earthwill expert's external injuries would usually scar in less than a day. After all, their physical fitness wasn't comparable to that of ordinary people. Even if his legs had suffered such a serious injury, it would normally take a week for them to recover. However, after a whole month, the wounds on his legs hadn't healed. As for the reason, Ning Caichen had to ask him. Every day, he would give him big bowls of wine and let him eat a type of transparent prawn whose bloodlines could be seen. Zhu Qingjun didn't reject any of these and never questioned them. He just drank the wine and ate the prawn with an indifferent expression. Another important point was that he couldn't muster up much strength. Perhaps this was related to the wine and prawn. Do you have anything else to say? Ning Caichen put down the curtains and turned to look at Zhu Qingjun. Last words. Can you help me achieve them? At this moment, Zhu Qingjun's body was much thinner than before. His face was paler, and there wasn't much luster in his eyes. You can tell me so that you can have some thoughts, Ning Caichen said softly. He didn't have any hatred or opinions towards Zhu Qingjun. Zhu Qingjun even saved his life. The reason why he didn't let Zhu Qingjun's wounds heal was simple. He wasn't confident that he could watch over an earthwill expert 24 hours a day. However, if the other party was seriously injured, it would be easy. My parents are long dead, and there's nothing to care about. I heard that the people of Deo like to bury the dead under the plaza. Please find another place to bury me. I don't want to die in peace. Also, dig the pit deeper. I don't want to be dug out by stray dogs, Zhu Qingjun said faintly. I'll try my best. Ning Caichen felt that he could fulfill this wish of hers. He had brought such a big piece of news to Qi Zixiao and even brought her over. She probably wouldn't mind such a small request, right? From Ning Caichen's point of view, Qi Zixiao was still relatively easy to talk to. Other than her outstanding martial arts, she was a little cold, a little arrogant, a little bad-tempered, and a little ruthless. Compared to those who would turn their backs on him, such as the people from the 9 pavilions, she was much better. At this moment, the carriage suddenly stopped. The eyes of Qing Yuan and Hong Luan turned red. Ren Baqian's face was full of vigor. Was she that touched? What's the matter? Is it done? The Empress acted as if she had just found out about Ren Baqian. Your Majesty, national affairs are more important. Ren Baqian lamented. I know. The Empress waved her hand indifferently. Sigh. Ren Baqian sighed. Recently, the Empress seemed to have opened the door to a new world. As long as she didn't attend court, she would curl up on the sofa and watch television series. As for Qing Yuan and Hong Luan, they were like the Empress's little tails, following her every day to watch television series. Your Majesty, it's done. Ren Baqian adjusted his mood and placed the cloth bag on the coffee table with a proud look on his face. He opened the bag and revealed 2 round glasses. Why do they look a little green? The Empress asked curiously as she picked up the cup. She had seen a lot of glass cups, so she didn't find it strange. However, the cup that Rinpoche took out was made by the glass factory outside Lon City, so it naturally had a different meaning. Even Qing Yuan and Hong Wan didn't look too surprised. They had even watched television series before. Even though this kind of cup carved from gemstones was precious, it wouldn't make a fuss about it. Both of them had seen the world before. It should be because of the iron and the raw material. We just have to think of a way to remove it later, Rinpoche said happily. Since the glass cups were made, it would be much easier to make them later. However, the biggest problem now was that the furnace fire wasn't very stable, so the success rate was relatively low. This required the workers of the glass factory to try it out bit by bit, and it would probably improve after a period of time. This month, the glass factory was finally built and successfully made the first batch of cups today. However, only a few of them were in good condition, and the two that Rinpoche brought were in the best condition. Can the sun furnace be made? The Empress still remembered the term that Rinpoche mentioned. In fact, she had learned a lot of words from Earth and some Chinese characters. Well, she learned all of them through television series. She also learned a few words in Russian and English. I want this, in other words, it was, I want this. Well, she basically only talked to Rinpoche. This was the sentence that she most often said to people outside. After a few more days, when the craftsmen are more familiar with it, it will be ready. Rinpoche nodded. Since the glass was made, the first thing to do was to make the solar furnace. After all, the requirements for making it weren't too high. Previously, when he was in Shicheng, he had already obtained the installation angle blueprint and the mold for the concave mirror. After making the concave mirror, he just had to brush the silver at the back. He had almost memorized the entire set of techniques. While making the concave mirror, he could also train the craftsmen. After that, he could make pure glass products and sell them for money. One had to know that the precious items in the imperial treasury were still there, but more than half of the gold, silver, and jewels were gone. There wasn't much to begin with, and the Empress used it to purchase weapons. The last time Rinpoche went to the imperial treasury, he saw that it was actually a gift for the Empress's birthday. Now, a portion of the medicinal ingredients were used on Rinpoche and the glass factory. More than half of the money was used. Rinpoche only discovered this when he went to the imperial treasury with the Empress recently. Previously, the Empress didn't even mention this to him. This made Rinpoche feel a little touched, but also a little helpless. If she had mentioned this earlier, he could have brought a bag of nail clippers back and sold it for a lot of money. Chapter 259. One on Earth, every city was brightly lit at night. However, in places where the lights couldn't reach, there were often some evil things happening. For example, at the border of our country, in a city that was rich in beauties, two bald youths were pointing a gun at a bruised yellow-skinned, black-haired youth. Their faces were filled with ridicule. "Khitan people, I hate you. You should scram back to where you belong." A bald youth cursed drunkenly. The black-haired youth's face was filled with fear. He knew who he had met. Those youths were known as the skinheads. They were affiliated with radical parties and held strong hostility towards all outsiders. It wasn't just yellow-skinned Chinese or Vietnamese like him. There were also black-haired people from the Caucasus region, as well as Africans and South Americans. If he met them, he would be punched and kicked. If it was serious, he might even lose his life. 2 years ago, someone was even stabbed to death at the entrance of the university. Now, he only hoped that these two people would let him go. At this moment, his heart was filled with fear and regret. He shouldn't have come out alone at night. However, he was muddle-headed and wasted time with that junior sister. "I have an interesting game. Why don't we play it?" The other bald youth had a malicious smile on his face. He tapped the revolver with his finger and the magazine immediately popped out. He slowly inserted 3 bullets into it. There was an empty space between every 2 bullets. His other hand slid on the magazine. The magazine immediately spun. Then, he swung the magazine back to its original position. Let's play a game. As long as you don't die, we will let you go. The bald youth had a face filled with malice and ridicule as he pointed the gun at the black-haired youth. The black-haired youth was almost paralyzed on the ground. His face was filled with fear. 3 bullets and 3 empty spaces. In other words, there was a 50% chance that he would die. The other 50% might not be a good result. The other 2 people looked at the terrified expression of him paralyzed on the ground and let out a burst of laughter. This game is very interesting. I also want to play. At this moment, a man's voice suddenly came from the entrance of the alley. He spoke in broken Russian. Word by word. Who are you? Come out. The bald young man turned around and pointed the gun at him. But just as he turned around, he saw a figure rush into his arms at an extremely fast speed and hit him heavily in the abdomen. Another hand grabbed his wrist and pulled, and the gun was in the other party's hand. Before he could do anything else, the man punched him in the ear again, making him unable to move half of his body and seeing stars. His companion was in an even worse state. A woman in red descended from the sky and stomped him to the ground. One could even hear the sound of his bones breaking. Get lost, we islanders hate you pigs the most. Renbochin held the gun in his hand and pointed at the black-haired man who looked like an exchange student from China. Renbochin was still speaking in poor Russian. The black-haired youth was dumbfounded at first, then he scrambled away, not daring to look back. After running far away, he still had a baffled look on his face. Was that person really a Japanese? Why did he save her? But at that time, that person's back was to the light. Renbochin actually didn't see that person's face and didn't know who that person was. Renbochin stepped on the bald young man's head, then lowered his head and took out bullets from his pocket. He loaded 2 more bullets and slid the magazine back to its original position. I like this game. If you don't die, I will let you off. Renbochin smiled. He had seen many of these bald young men in our nation. A month had passed in Dayo. During this period, he came back 6 times and stayed in our nation for almost a month. He didn't know if he was unlucky or if others were unlucky. Maybe it was because he always came out at night or the Empress was too eye-catching. In a month, he met a total of 7 such violent young men. Most of them were between 15 and 20 years old. They were very childish and immature. They were muddled by some slogans and their minds were filled with violence. In Renbochin's heart, they were just a bunch of kids. Therefore, he must not let them off. Without waiting for the youth to speak, Renbochin immediately pulled the trigger. Bang! The gunshot was very loud. I'm sorry, your luck isn't very good, Renbochin said apologetically to the Sakuma with ketchup at his feet. The youth under the Empress's feet struggled with all his might. At this moment, he had already sobered up from the alcohol and was trying his best to break free from the person behind him. However, that person was like a nail nailed him to the ground and he couldn't move no matter what. I'm sorry, spare me, spare me. That bald young man cried with all his might. It's just a game, why is there such a big reaction? Renbochin was flabbergasted. Following which, he comforted him gently. Be good and listen to me. I am a man of my words. After this shot, I will let you off regardless of whether you die or not. After he finished speaking, he pointed the gun at the other party's head. With a look of disgust, the Empress flashed and appeared a few meters away. Bang! I'm sorry, both of your luck isn't very good. It seems like this game isn't very fun. Renbochin apologized to the 2 piles of Sakuma with ketchup. Following which, he stuffed the gun into his waist. The pedestrians who were attracted by the gunshot immediately screamed in fear when they saw the empty alley and the two piles of sakuma. After a while, before the local police arrived, 3 young men and women with black hair and yellow skin dashed into the alley and carefully examined the scene. "Was it done by them?" one of the women asked quickly. "This person's shoulder blade is broken. It seems like it was crushed by someone stepping on it. There is also some mud here. The outline is a footprint. It's most likely done by them. Damn it, they got away again." That woman cursed angrily. It had been 3 months. For 3 whole months, the other party had never restrained himself. Wherever he went, he would cause all kinds of incidents. Most of them were still murder cases. They had been tracking for 3 months, and every time, they missed by a hair's breadth. They couldn't even catch a glimpse of the other party's back. Every one of them was proficient in one or more of computer, tracking, fighting, firearms, infiltration, information analysis, and driving cars and planes. Every one of them was an elite among the elites. However, they couldn't even catch a glimpse of the other party's tail and were being played around in circles by the other party. At this moment, it wasn't just the 3 of them. There was another team of 3 people who were also looking for the traces of the other 2 people. This clearly meant that they were incompetent. When they thought about it, they felt that it was simply a humiliation. Now, they had almost forgotten their original intention of looking for the other party. All they could think of was to catch them and wash away this humiliation. If the other party had absconded obediently, they might not have been so angry. However, the other party had never concealed his whereabouts. He swaggered around unscrupulously, but they couldn't even catch a glimpse of the other party's tail. How could they be convinced? On top of a tall building not far away, Renbachin used a pair of binoculars to look at the 3 people coming out of the alley. He said with great interest, "They seem to have been chasing for a long time and haven't given up yet." Following which, he complained, "There are so many cases in the country waiting for them to handle. I have already run so far away. Do they have to chase me so relentlessly? It seems like I haven't posted on my WeChat moments for a long time." Renbachin thought for a while. In any case, the other party had been following behind him. Even if he didn't post, they would still know where he was. Thinking of this, Renbachin switched on the phone that he hadn't used for a long time. Then, he aimed it at himself and the building behind him and revealed a bright smile. Zixiao, smile. Renbachin didn't forget to turn around and shout. The Empress only rolled her eyes at him. The Ren family. These days, Papa Ren and Mama Ren had been worried about their son. They didn't know how he was doing and were afraid that something had happened to him. At this moment, Papa Ren's phone suddenly rang. He picked it up with a start and realized that it was Ren Wanyan, who had just entered university. Sigh. Papa Ren sighed. He had been waiting for his eldest son to call him for some time. "Dad, quickly look at WeChat. Brother has posted on his WeChat moments." Papa Ren heard his youngest son shouting excitedly when he answered the phone. "What?" Papa Ren was shocked. He quickly opened WeChat to check his WeChat moments and saw the photo that the person he wanted to see the most had just posted. Under the dim light of the night, the background was filled with exotic architecture. Renbachin faced the camera with a bright smile and even made a very old-fashioned peace sign. Not far behind him was the profile of a woman in red with her long hair fluttering in the wind. There was also a short paragraph below. "The scenery is not bad, but the temperature is a little low and cold. In addition, it has been cloudy recently. Everyone, don't forget to collect the clothes when it rains." Papa Ren and Mama Ren were stunned when they saw Renbachin's WeChat moments. The Chen family. Chen Qing and Jiang Nan were also stunned when they saw Renbachin's WeChat moments. This person was simply invincible. He actually dared to swagger and post on his WeChat moments when he was on the run. How much did he want to die? In a car on the street, 2 men and a woman looked gloomy. As the phone rang, the older man lowered his head and looked at the phone. It was a familiar number. He had just reported the situation in the morning. Why was he calling at this time? When he picked up the phone with a gloomy face and heard the content clearly, his face turned as black as the bottom of a pot. A moment later, he received 2 pictures on his phone. On the pictures was Renbachian's bright smile and that paragraph. The 3 of them looked at the pictures on the phone and their faces turned as black as the bottom of a pot. Chapter 260. 1. 2 days later, Renbachian and the Empress sat on a train, listening to the rumbling of the train as they toured the rural scenery of this foreign country. They had already left our nation and left on the same night. They first passed through Belarus, which was rich in beauties, then Poland, and finally came to this country. Their destination was the most suitable city for lovers to visit, Prague. Renbachian had an impression of this city after listening to the song, Prague Square. When he chose his route, he specifically chose this city. Ouch, it's so cold. Renbachian wrapped his coat tightly, and his face turned red from the cold. The Czech Republic wasn't too cold in early October. The temperature was about 16 or 17 degrees Celsius, but anyone who sat on a train and was exposed to the cold wind for an hour would feel very cold. Yes, on the train. Renbachian and the Empress were on the train and not inside it. The oncoming wind rushed straight into Renbachian's mouth. Now, his strength was about 150 kilograms, and he was much stronger than before. However, this didn't mean that he wasn't afraid of the cold. On the contrary, the Empress, who was at the side, wasn't affected at all by the temperature and the cold wind. Her skirt and hair were blown to the back and danced along with the wind. The Empress had a satisfied expression on her face. She squinted her eyes and hugged her knees. Renbachian realized that the Empress would squint her eyes when she was satisfied and when she wanted to kill someone. The difference was that when she was satisfied, her nose would wrinkle slightly, but when she wanted to kill someone, the corners of her eyes would rise. It was a very subtle difference. As the front of the train entered the tunnel, the 2 of them lay flat on the roof of the carriage and waited to sit up after exiting the tunnel. Since I have nothing to do, let's tease them again. With a malicious smile on his face, Renbachian took out the old phone from his pocket and switched it on. Then, he sent a photo of himself and the wilderness behind him. It feels colder today, and my face is almost frozen. Traveling by train in this season isn't a good choice. Renbachian ignored the fact that he was on the train and not inside it. He sent the photo along with this message and switched off his phone. After a while, Papa Ren, Mama Ren, Chin Ching. Jiangnan, a certain department was in a state of chaos. Quickly find out where he is. The trio that had been following behind Renbachian and eating his dust immediately received 2 pictures. Their faces turned as black as the bottom of a pot. Ever since they accepted this mission, the 3 of them felt that they were in a bad mood. It was as if they were living between being teased and trying their best to be teased every day. 3 whole months. No matter who it was, they would go crazy after being teased for 3 months. Ho Yong, where are they? As soon as he received the pictures, the older man among the 3 received a call. As soon as the call connected, he was bombarded with a series of questions. Ho Yong's face darkened. They must have left country R. According to the route, they should be in Belarus now. Find him. Ho Yong hung up the phone and gritted his teeth. He also wanted to find him, but the closest he got was not even a glimpse of his back. Where is he going? Although Ho Yong was furious, he still took out the map and compared the previous route. The cities that the 2 of them had been to before had all been marked. It was a zigzag curve, completely unlike the other fugitives who had a destination. Instead, it was as if they were really on a sightseeing tour. After entering Country R from Country M, they went as far north as Dixon Island, which was close to the Arctic Circle. They also went to Moscow and stayed there for 2 days, leaving behind a murder case. Then, they went south to the border of Ukraine before turning west to a border city near Belarus. Not only did their movement seem like they were on a sightseeing tour, but they also had no clear destination. Every 10 days, they would commit a murder case. It could be said that they were the poorest, most vicious, and most unscrupulous fugitives that he had seen all these years. At this moment, Renbochin covered his face with both hands and was deep in thought. Finally, he revealed his major discovery. Zixiao, I think I've been cursed by the Bichi. The Empress turned to look at him and said faintly, didn't you already know? Renbochin sighed. Ever since he met the Bichi, he was captured by the Flower Eagle, tried to assassinate, and poisoned. It wasn't easy for him to cure the poison, and he was chased and intercepted in Great Xia. When he finally returned to Dayo, he encountered a murderer and then Jin Jun. In the end, he ended up as a wanted criminal. This wasn't the end. Originally, his goal had always been to run away obediently and live a peaceful life. However, no matter where he went, he would encounter trouble. He would be robbed, attacked, robbed. Sometimes, Renbochin couldn't help but wonder why the security in Country R was so bad. It was a big country after all. How did the Chinese who worked and studied in Country R survive there? Fortunately, he had finally left that country with terrible security and would never go there again. Renbochin recalled what happened in the past few months and felt that he was simply too unlucky. Other people might not encounter even once in their lifetime, but he had encountered all of them in a few months. He wouldn't believe that the Bichi didn't play a part in this. Wasn't it said that misfortune and blessing came hand in hand? Why was there only misfortune and no blessing? Where was the blessing? The only thing that gave him a little comfort was that he wasn't the one who died. How long will the curse of the Bichi last? Renbochin couldn't help but ask. 3 to 5 years at the very least, and I don't know how long it will take, the Empress said faintly. She then added, with me around, you won't die. Renbochin felt warmth in his heart. He grabbed the Empress's hand. Pow! Renbochin looked at his hand, which had become swollen like a pig's trotter, and lamented, Zixiao, it's swollen. The Empress snorted and couldn't be bothered to look at him. When they saw the city in front of them, the Empress carried Renbochin and appeared by the roadside in a flash. I'm standing in the square at dusk in Prague, casting my hope in the wishing pond, the flock of white pigeons with their backs facing the setting sun, the scene is too beautiful for me to look at. Renbochin hummed a tune as he and the Empress arrived at their destination, Prague. Ho Yong held the map and studied it for a long time. He casually asked the young lady beside him, Cece, if it were you, where would you like to go in the vicinity? Cece glanced at the map and said without hesitation, Brago. That's the most suitable city for lovers and relaxation. Ho Yong slapped his thigh. Weren't they a pair of lovers? They had been inseparable for the past few months. They often went to the supermarket together and even went to Turkey together. Who would believe that they weren't lovers? In that case, their target was most likely to be Prague. Quick, book the plane tickets immediately. After finishing his sentence, he called his superior and said, I suspect that their target is Prague. I'm rushing over now. The other party was silent for a while. Then, he said in a relaxed tone, Team 2 has reached Prague yesterday. You guys should set off quickly. You must find them. The piano keys are shining with light. Shining with light. Painted glass windows. Decorated Gothic churches. Who played a piece of music? A piece of wandering sorrow. Looking at the direction of the music, roses were attached to an oil painting from the 18th century. Quietly admiring at the side. Thinking about your romance. Seeing if it's the same for how long. At this moment, Renbochin felt that he had maxed out his hip-hop talent. However, in the eyes of the Empress, his hip-hop talent was nothing more than a long-winded mumble. Walking into this colorful city, he felt his heart lighten up. However, he still had to buy some ointment like safflower oil that could remove blood stasis and dissolve blood stasis. Chapter 261. Renbochin was wearing a jacket, jeans, canvas shoes, and carrying a small bag. He looked no different from an ordinary young man who was traveling. If there was any difference, it would be that his female companion was simply too beautiful. It made people cast sidelong glances and endlessly envious of him. On the other hand, the Empress was wearing a red dress that revealed her arms. In such weather, the people around her felt very cold, but she didn't seem to be aware of it at all. Both of them strolled along the streets of the new district of Prague. Occasionally, the Empress would see beautiful clothes in the display window and would faintly say, "Here." Once again, the Empress entered a shop that was filled with an exotic style. She paused for a moment in front of a bohemian-style long dress. It was a red dress with blue, white, and black interwoven flowers on it. At the same time, there were white tulle and tassels below the neckline. It was filled with an exotic style and perfectly accentuated the charm of a woman. The Empress stood in front of this dress and scrutinized it for a moment. She had a rare look of hesitation on her face. It could be seen that she liked this dress very much, but she had never worn such a style before. Most of her dresses were bright red. There weren't too many complicated colors, and the style was relatively simple. Many dresses only had a slight difference in the neckline and cuffs. The colors of this dress were too dazzling, and the style was also very complicated. "Zixiao, you will definitely look very good in this dress. In this world, there are only clothes that don't match up to you, and there are no clothes that don't look good on you," Renbochin said gently. He really wanted to see the Empress wearing such a feminine dress. It would definitely be very alluring. Renbochin said in a gentle and bewitching voice. However, he was right about one thing. A beautiful person would look good in anything they wore. No matter how old-fashioned the clothes were, the Empress would be able to wear them with the feeling of a runway. After a while, the Empress changed into a dress and walked out of the fitting room. Renbochin immediately exclaimed in admiration and applauded, "Wow! There's no one more beautiful than you in this world. You are the only one, the most resplendent one. I'm sure of it." At this moment, the Empress was wearing an exotic floral dress. The curves of her upper body were completely revealed, and her hair was scattered on her shoulders and back. The corners of her eyes and the tips of her eyebrows carried a trace of gentleness. Her entire being was filled with the charm of a woman. She was gorgeous, and it was difficult for people to take their eyes off her. Renbochin wasn't the only one. Even the shop owner at the side, a young lady in her 20s, exclaimed in admiration. She quickly ran to the side to retrieve a sky-blue shawl with lace patterns and placed it on the Empress's shoulder. Then, she stood at the side and smiled. There was a tinge of jealousy in her smile. While the Empress was standing in front of the mirror and sizing up her slightly different self, Renbochin had already paid the bill. The price wasn't expensive. The dress and the shawl cost around 700 euros. On the Empress, it made people feel that there should be 2 zeros at the back of the dress. The Empress wasn't used to it after putting it on and wanted to change back into her dress. He stopped her and said, "You should let the whole world know how beautiful you are. Besides, a change of style can also change my mood." The Empress pondered for a while and didn't insist. Renbochin conveniently took a straw hat from the side and placed it on the Empress's head. It matched the dress very well. As the saying went, a beautiful person would look good in anything. Even a cotton-padded jacket could bring out the vibe of a fashion week. "Can I take a photo?" the shop owner suddenly asked. "What?" Renbochin didn't really understand the other party's broken English. Of course, even if the other party's English wasn't broken, it would still be very difficult for him to understand. The other party took out his phone and switched it to the photo mode. Renbochin then understood. "Zixiao, she wants to keep your beauty," Renbochin said to the Empress with a smile. The Empress held the hat with one hand and allowed the shop owner to take a photo. Then, the two of them left the place. Prague was very small. It was more than 400 square kilometers. A level 5 city in Renbochin's hometown was 40 times the size of Prague. This place was only equivalent to the size of a district in a level 5 city. As the two of them moved forward, the road beneath their feet began to turn into a stone road. It wasn't made of flagstones, but small stones. If the soles of their shoes weren't thick enough, the soles of their feet would hurt a little. The temperature wasn't considered high. It was about 17 or 18 degrees Celsius, but it was a sunny and beautiful day. There were always groups of tourists sitting at the tables by the roadside in the cafe. They didn't feel cold at all. Most of them were young couples. There were also friends or families that came here to play. The entire city gave off a very relaxed, leisurely, and comfortable feeling. Renbochin and the Empress found a cafe and sat down. The Empress held a cup of yogurt and slowly sipped on it. When the dessert was served, she immediately diverted her attention. She tried it once, but she didn't like the taste of coffee. Instead, she liked the yogurt. Another thing that never changed was the dessert and candy. On the crowded Charles Bridge, two people stood at both ends of the bridge. There was another person standing in the middle of the bridge, inspecting the crowd. It's very likely that they have already reached Prague. The photo that person posted on his WeChat Moments just now should be of an area north of Prague. The satellite photo is 90% similar. Pay more attention, especially to the lady in red. The man in the middle of the bridge was handsome, amiable, and had a faint smile on his face. It was very easy for people to let down their guard against him. At this moment, he spoke to the other two through the microphone on his collar. There were too many people here. There were also many black-haired and yellow-skinned Chinese people. The lady in red was a more obvious target. Since her appearance, although the style of her dress had changed slightly, the color had never changed. People couldn't help but wonder how much she liked the color red. With her ostentatious and unscrupulous behavior, no one thought that she would change her clothes and hide her whereabouts. "Got it," the other two answered one after another. "Remember, if you find them, don't rashly come into contact with them. Inform me immediately. Also, don't provoke them. They are very dangerous. They are vicious, merciless, and unscrupulous," the man warned again. "Understood." The other two naturally knew how dangerous these two people were. The information that they received from time to time over the past few days had already explained how crazy and ruthless they were. "I will give you a holiday after we return." The man leaned on the bridge and smiled at the passers-by, causing several blonde and blue-eyed beauties to look interested. "Boss, you seem to be raising flags," a man complained. "You talk too much." "Hey, handsome, do you have time for a cup of coffee?" A young girl who looked at most 20 years old and was full of energy came forward to strike up a conversation. "Although I really want to go, it's a pity that I'm waiting for someone now," the man said apologetically. His voice was full of magnetism, and his every movement exuded a hormonal aura. The girl's eyes were almost sparkling. "This is my phone number. You must call me when you meet the person." The girl took out a pen and wrote a series of numbers on the back of the man's hand. The man kissed the phone number on the back of his hand and smiled, causing the girl's eyes to light up. Boss, you are picking up girls again. I'm being picked up. The man corrected. There's no justice in this world. Don't be distracted. This trip isn't for fun, but for work. Pay more attention to the lady in red, the man repeated his words tirelessly. Looking at the sea of people on Charlie Bridge, he felt as if he had encountered the Golden Week. He had only seen the terrifying sea of people at the tourist attractions during the Golden Week on the internet before. At first, he didn't have the money, but later on, he didn't have the opportunity. Now, he actually felt it in a foreign country. Not only were there many Caucasians here, but there were also many black-haired and yellow-skinned Chinese people. He even saw a group of Little Red Riding Hoods. So many people. The Empress sighed as she looked at the sea of people in front of her. The old city area in front is the most beautiful. Ren Baqian looked into the distance. Then, the two of them blended into this sea of people. 2 meters away from the two of them, a man wearing a hat was looking around in the crowd. Ren Baqian. Qi Zixiao. The lady in red, Ren Baqian and Qi Zixiao's faces were blocked by a few tall young Caucasians in front of them. When those young people got out of the way, the man only saw a blue shawl and a straw hat in the crowd and looked away. Chapter 262. Ren Baqian and the Empress walked on Charles Bridge. The Empress activated her halo again, and a bone-chilling coldness was emitted from her position. Everyone subconsciously kept a distance of half a meter away from her. This was the subconscious instinct of the surrounding people, and even most people didn't realize this. Although the bridge was like a sea of heads, it was not to the extent that people were rubbing shoulders with each other, so no one noticed this gap. After walking for a short distance, the two of them saw the source of the music and drumming that they had been hearing. A man was sitting on the edge of the bridge, beating a hand drum with one hand and blowing a 1.5-meter-long pipe at the same time. The sound of the hand drum gave the tune a very hollow and distant feeling. The sound of the hand drum made the tune even more primitive. The two of them sized it up for a moment before passing by. There are 30 statues of saints on both sides of the Charles Bridge, each representing a story. As Ren Baqian walked, he told the story of the statue to the Empress. He was completely looking at his phone as he was telling the story. He wasn't very qualified as a tour guide and wasn't very dutiful either. After telling the story of the statue, he lost interest and immediately stuffed his phone into his pocket. The Empress didn't understand these histories and allusions. She couldn't feel the deep cultural heritage and didn't care at all. Of course, Ren Baqian couldn't feel it. However, the scenery along the coast from the bridge was very beautiful, especially the old city on the other side of the bridge. There were red and white houses everywhere, and tall Gothic towers. These exotic buildings were more beautiful than the statues. He took out his old cell phone and switched it on. Then, he stuck close to the Empress and said, "Zixiao, smile." On the screen, one of them had a bright smile on his face, while the other was exquisite and beautiful. Both of them were looking into the distance. The background of the two was a sea of people and the statue of the saint on Charles Bridge. The weather's great, but there are too many people. Ren Baqian switched off his phone after posting the post. Papa Ren, Mama Ren, Chen Qing, a certain department, everyone was speechless. It was rare for someone to run to this extent. Papa Ren and Mama Ren were speechless as they looked at the photo on the cell phone. This guy was alive and kicking and had a cheerful look on his face. It was impossible to tell that he was a wanted man. The two of them didn't know if they should be relieved or worried. At least for now, Ren Baqian seemed pretty good. But if he continued to jump around like this, he wouldn't be far from going to prison. The two of them were still full of reverence for their country. Who is this? This woman is really beautiful, even more beautiful than a celebrity. Ren Wanyan was sitting in his dormitory with a very interesting expression on his face, as if he was constipated. As soon as his roommate turned around and saw his expression, he immediately leaned over to take a look at the photo on the phone. Then, he was shocked. My brother and his girlfriend, Ren Wanyan guessed. It should be. At the very least, Ren Bachin could see the shadow of this woman in his WeChat moments. Awesome. You must let me see your sister-in-law in person if I have the chance. I want to see the difference between the real person and the photo. The roommate immediately patted him on the shoulder. Ren Wanyan didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He didn't even know what to say. Was he going to tell her that his brother was on the run because he was wanted by the entire country? Looking at the smug and brilliant smile on his face, how could anyone tell? And he still had the mood to post it on his moments. She had worried for nothing. In the middle of the bridge, a handsome man was leaning against the side of the bridge, his eyes scanning the crowd. Occasionally, he would exchange glances with the beautiful women passing by, and he would nod and smile. Then, when someone asked for his phone number, he would politely refuse. This had already happened 5 or 6 times. What a beautiful woman. His eyes suddenly fixed on a face under a straw hat in the crowd, and he couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. After so many years of experience, this woman was also the best of the best. In particular, the indifference on her face made people want to conquer her even more. Then, he realized that this face was a little familiar. His eyes lit up as he said, "It's her. They are here." At this moment, his phone rang. After hesitating for a while, he quickly picked it up. "Shindu, they are on Charles Bridge. I've seen it." Shindu said quickly and hung up the phone. At the same time, he said to the other 2 people, "The target has appeared. He is at my position." First, he quickly advanced parallel to Rinpochen and then cut in front of them. "Can the 2 of you talk for a while? I mean no harm." Shindu spread out his hands and said. Previously, he had always wanted to meet the 2 people in a more remote place where it would be more convenient to talk. However, he suddenly felt that such a crowded place was actually better. At least in such a crowded place, the other party wouldn't kill him without saying a word, right? Furthermore, it wouldn't be that easy for them to escape. Not interested. Renbachin loathed the other party as soon as he saw him. He hated gigolos the most in this life. It shouldn't take up too much of your time. Furthermore, it will be beneficial for you. Don't you want to return to China? Shindu said with a smile. His voice was magnetic and very peaceful. It didn't carry any hostility or make people feel threatened. If it were someone else, they would probably have a good impression of him. For such a person, no matter who it was, no one would dislike him. However, Renbachin hated him even more. "I'm not representing myself. It's not me who wants to talk to you, but the nation." Shindu smiled and said to the Empress. It had to be said that Shindu was very good at communicating with people. First, he showed that he wasn't hostile. Second, he showed that he knew the other party's identity but didn't point it out so that the other party wouldn't suddenly explode. Finally, he brought up the killer weapon of the nation. His words could make people's imaginations run wild and want to hear him continue. Especially to 2 people who were being hunted down. Renbachin's brain quickly turned twice, trying to guess what the other party meant. The other party was representing the nation. The nation wanted to talk to the 2 of them. About what? What did the nation know? "You look very much like someone I hate," the Water Empress suddenly said. The smile that Shindu had been maintaining suddenly froze. "This isn't important. I'm not that person. What's important is to talk to the nation. It's only beneficial for you. I hate him too." Renbachin turned his head and said to the Empress with his eyebrows knitted together. He really hated this person. If there was a reason, it would be that he was too handsome. What surprised him was that the Empress had already expressed her hatred for him before he even saw her. At this moment, Shendu's smile was really stiff. He completely didn't know how he offended these two people. The next second, Shendu drew an arc and fell into the river under the bridge. Chief, another man who had just squeezed out from the crowd, saw this scene and immediately shouted. Then, he also fell in an arc. The surrounding people were completely shocked by this scene. Only a small number of people saw that it was the woman wearing the straw hat who threw the two people into the river. Most of them still didn't understand what happened. "I'm your brother, and I won't watch the two of you get married. It's simply a disgrace for two men to get married. Both of you better calm down." Renbochin leaned on the stone railing and shouted to the people below. Some of the surrounding people who understood suddenly came to a realization and rushed to the side of the bridge. There were also people who were good at English who translated what Renbochin shouted to the others. The people nearby were worried at first, but when they saw the two people emerging from the water, they gave their blessings to the two people below the bridge. Applause rang out from the surrounding people. Chapter 263. Zixiao, who do you think he looks like? After leaving Charles Bridge, Renbochin turned around and asked the Empress. He was thinking about the seventh prince of Great Xia. He didn't know how that guy was doing. If he killed him, would he become stronger? It was a pity that the prince of Great Xia wasn't that easy to kill. What he didn't know was that the seventh prince's head had already been reduced to bones. It was the evening before he broke through the visualization of water. "Hua Sanlu," the Empress said faintly. That person reminded her of Hua Sanlu as he looked like him. However, she understood what he said. Otherwise, she would have smacked him to death. The fifth most powerful expert in the world. Renbochin was surprised. He had never seen Hua Sanlu before and didn't know if Shendu looked the same as him. Maybe they just looked alike. If they looked exactly the same, then it would be more interesting. He asked the Empress what was on his mind. "Do they look alike?" The Empress shook her head slightly, just a little. Renbochin nodded. It was normal to have people who looked alike. However, the nation wanted to talk to him. Interesting. I wonder what the nation knows. They probably don't know that I can transmigrate. In that case, they probably know about the laboratory and want to know where I got it. Do I have any other things? This possibility is quite high. I have a lot of good things. It's not impossible to cooperate with the nation. Just like that longevity saber, it's very magical but not very useful. Renbochin was originally prepared to build a physical chemistry laboratory in the future. Cooperating with the nation would save him a lot of trouble. However, he still had to put on airs. Climbing up a pole wasn't a business deal. At the thought of this, he relaxed and continued to tour the old city of Prague with the Empress. They stopped for a while under the tower of Charles Bridge and went straight to the legendary old square of Prague. I saw them, but the mission failed. Shendu climbed out of the water and used the phone of his companion who wasn't thrown into the water to make a call. What happened? The person on the other side of the phone asked in a deep voice. I don't know, they said they hate me. Shendu gritted his teeth when he said this. He didn't expect that he, who was loved by everyone, would have such a day. The person on the other side of the phone was silent for a while before comforting him. Don't worry, you aren't RMB. Not everyone likes you. Follow them first, the first group will be there soon. Shendu's face was as black as the bottom of a pot. Why do I feel like there's something wrong with your words? There wasn't any conflict, right? The person on the other side asked again. Shendu's face darkened even further. There was no conflict. They just said that they hated me and threw me into the Voltava River. From your voice, it sounds like you're fine. Don't get into a conflict with them. Number 2 is still alright, but I'm afraid that number 1 is somewhat inhuman. This was the code name given by the department. Number 2 was Renbachien, and number 1 was Qi Zixiao. After all, Renbachien used to be an ordinary person. Everything changed after Qi Zixiao appeared by his side. Qi Zixiao was the key. Renbachien and the Empress walked around Prague Square for a long time. There were white pigeons flying all around, and they could see couples holding hands and hugging each other everywhere. Renbachien lowered his head and looked at the Empress's hand. Then, he looked at his left hand, which was still swollen. In the end, he dispelled that thought. When the two of them were walking around the square, they heard the melodious sound of a bell. They followed the sound and ran to the astronomical clock. I want this. The Empress pointed at the astronomical clock after sizing it up for a long time. Renbachien knew that the Empress didn't want this clock, but wanted to build a similar clock tower in Lon City. It was indeed much more convenient to have a clock. There was no need to look at the sky to estimate the time. When it was cloudy and raining, the sun couldn't be seen and there was no accurate time. Okay. Renbachien nodded. It shouldn't be difficult to make such a clock. The main thing was to find someone to make the design. Some of the parts that couldn't be made in Deo could also be made on Earth. After the glass was made, he would sell the old clock and earn a lot of money. In the end, there were too many things that could be used to make money. Sometimes, Renbachien didn't know what to choose. Even the simplest nail clippers could be sold for a lot of money. Needles could also be used. Although Deo mostly used bone needles, many animal bones that couldn't be found on Earth were very tough after being ground into needles. However, they could still be sold to other countries for a lot of money. In particular, needles were small in size. If a caravan could bring a lot of them, the profits would definitely not be low. After the concave mirror was made, he would specially organize a caravan and carefully prepare some goods. Those countries had been making money in Deo for so many years, and it was time for them to spit out some of it. They walked and strolled along the way. Very soon, the sky turned dark. After dinner, they strolled along the streets of the old city. Suddenly, a bright flame shone in the sky. Fireworks. Renbachien looked up and was slightly surprised. Following which, a smile appeared on his face. At this moment, fireworks were being set off on a small boat in the river downstream of Charlie Bridge. There were always all kinds of surprises in this romantic city. The Empress was even more surprised than Renbachien. This was the first time she saw fireworks. The flowers in the sky made her eyes shine with a different light. The light from the fireworks shone on their faces, making them bright and dark at times. Not far away, there was a couple hugging each other and shouting in surprise. Renbachien was infected by this atmosphere. He made up his mind and used his pig trotter-like hand to grab the Empress's palm. There wasn't the expected paw. Renbachien grabbed it firmly and a slender and soft palm fell into his palm. Renbachien turned his head to look at the Empress, but she raised her head to look at the fireworks. However, her eyes were a little wandering and her ears were a little hot. You are the most beautiful treasure that heaven has given to this world. Renbachien whispered in her ear. The Empress's ears turned even redder. Renbachien sniffed the fragrance from the Empress's body and felt the softness and warmth of her hand. A kind of satisfaction and happiness filled his heart, making it full of warmth. The fireworks ended very quickly. After all, it was a private fireworks display and wouldn't last for half an hour. When the two of them stood there for a few minutes and still didn't see the fireworks rise, Renbachien knew that the fireworks had ended. It was a little regretful. It would be better if this moment could last a little longer. However, he didn't let go. He held the Empress's hand all along and pulled her up. Not far behind the two of them, there were 3 people. 2 of them were a couple, and the other was a single dog. He looked at the couples on the street with a face full of resentment. Renbochin smiled as he walked past. He listened to the joyful shouts coming from behind him and felt the surging affection between the two of them. Although the fireworks were gone, the warmth between the two of them was still there. He still hoped that the street would be longer so that they could walk a little longer. The Empress lowered her head slightly as if she was counting the stones on the ground. Sorry to disturb the two of you. 3 people in front stopped the two of them. The Water Empress raised her head. Her eyes were filled with a bone-chilling coldness. It only took an instant for her to go from warmth to coldness. The Empress's hand left Renbochin's pig trotter. Feeling the Empress's hand being pulled away from his palm, Renbochin's eyes widened, and he flew into a rage. You know that I'm disturbing you, yet you still come out. His right hand reached behind his waist, pulled out his gun, and fired. His face was filled with resentment. How long has it been? Ha! After such a long time, I've finally managed to hold her hand and nurture our relationship. How dare you come out to disturb me? You're apologizing to me. If apologies were useful, why would we need the police? Why would he need a gun? The 3 of them were shocked by Renbochin's actions. They hurriedly ran to the side and broke the window of the house next to them. Bang! 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 3 consecutive gunshots rang out, and the stone chips on the ground flew everywhere. Renbochin gritted his teeth and threw the revolver that he had snatched from them through the window. Chapter 264. 1. When Ho Yong and the other 2 came out of the house, the 2 people outside had already disappeared. They are simply too vile, too excessive, too vicious. How could the higher-ups negotiate with such people? Cece gritted her teeth as glass shards fell from her body. It's not like you haven't read the information. Ho Yong was also angry, but he suppressed it because he knew that this was a serious matter. Thinking about the information she had read these days, Cece couldn't vent her anger anymore. The woman in the information was simply inhuman. They were shooting at the ground and didn't really want to do anything to you. Shendu and the other 2 walked out from the side. Shendu was in a good mood. At least he said a few words, and these 3 people were worse off than him. He immediately felt better. Humph. Ho Yong and the other 2 snorted. These 2 people had committed a total of 6 cases in our nation, and about 20 people had died. What they did in China was even more outrageous. The other party had already taken out their guns, and the 3 of them didn't dare to bet on whether they would shoot them or not. But you guys really deserve to be single. Shendu teased, they are having a sweet time there, but you guys were in such a hurry to disturb them. I already told you to wait a little longer, but you guys didn't believe me. Now that you have lost everything, I don't know when we will be able to stop them again. Stop making sarcastic remarks. Weren't you thrown into the river too? Ho Yong scolded. Being thrown into the river by such a beauty might be a blessing. It's better than being shot. Shendu didn't seem to care. Ho Yong's face turned black. Are you trying to disgust us? Group leader Shin, you must tell us when you and Lu Tong get married. We will give you our blessings, Cece said. Hearing this, Shendu's face turned black as well. That damn bastard was too vicious. I will add a chicken drumstick for you tonight. Ho Yong gave Cece an admiring look. Aren't you going back? The Empress asked casually as she looked at the colorful city under the night sky. She was a little surprised when he opened fire just now. In fact, she already understood what that person on the bridge said in the afternoon. Otherwise, she would have killed him with a slap. You look like someone I hate, so I'll kill you. This logic was valid in the Empress's mind. However, the Empress still remembered that Renbochin had a wrong look on his face when he first escaped. She felt that he probably still wanted to go back. Of course, we have to go back, Renbochin said as he looked down. At this time, the two of them were in the astronomical clock tower. Sometimes, the two of them would stay in the hotel for a night. Of course, they wouldn't go through the front desk. It was indeed troublesome to not have a passport, but Renbochin had yet to find a suitable person to make 2 passports. At this time, looking at the colorful city under the night sky from the tower, there were still some people wandering in the square below. After hearing Renbochin's reply, the Empress didn't say anything else. Renbochin turned his head and looked at the Empress with an expression that said, "Why don't you ask? I'll tell you if you ask." Unfortunately, the Empress didn't even look at him. Renbochin held back for a long time. In the end, his face turned from one of anticipation to one of bitterness. Sure enough, it was impossible to wait for the Empress to play the role of a sidekick. However, he couldn't see the smile in the Empress's eyes. We definitely have to go back. After all, we're familiar with the place and it's more convenient for us to do anything. However, even though the nation wants to cooperate with us on certain things, the nation is made up of people, and people's thoughts are the most unreliable. If we go back like this, what if people think that we're easy to bully? What if someone points at us and says this and that every day, and they feel that it's only right? What should we do then? We can't possibly go on a killing spree or run away again, right? If that happens, the other party won't be able to tolerate it. Therefore, we have to put on airs first. It's better to get what we can't get. This way, after we have a good talk with the other party will scrutinize us carefully, and it will save us a lot of trouble in the future. Just like the Empress, Renbochin turned his head and looked at the plaza outside as he spoke unhurriedly. He was just an ordinary person with good stuff in his hands. He really didn't want to go back to the city and be in constant trouble. At that time, he couldn't just cause a ruckus at the slightest provocation. The Empress thought about his words. There were too many twists and turns, and she felt that it was too troublesome. If someone tried to take advantage of her, she could just slap them to death. If someone came looking for trouble, she could just slap them to death. If someone wasn't pleasing to the eye, she could just slap them to death. There was no need to be so troublesome. The two of them stood there for a long time before Renbochin said, "Let's go back." The Empress grabbed his wrist, and the two of them disappeared from the tower. On the second and third day, the two groups discovered that the two of them had disappeared again. However, everyone was already used to it. They would always disappear for 8 to 15 days, and then reappear for 3 to 5 days. Many people were curious about what they did when they disappeared. Hiding their tracks. That was impossible. It would be inconceivable if the two of them could hide their tracks. But, if they weren't hiding their tracks, what were they doing? At the same time, a certain department in the country invited some people to hold a special meeting. Previously, they thought that by finding the two of them, they would be able to achieve their goal. After all, Renbochin was still a little red flower. Through some forums, they found some of his previous statements, and it showed that he had trust and a good impression of the country. However, they didn't expect the two groups to actually fail. The other party even pulled out their guns without any hesitation. Even though they only shot at the ground, this also explained some problems. After this meeting, with the help of some people, a group of psychologists, criminologists, and other people was formed to study the thoughts of the two of them. Renbochin thought that the country was coveting the things in his hands because of the laboratory. In fact, it was only because of a video and some things found at the scene of the Jean family's death that made some people realize that there was a superhuman like the Empress in this world. A superhuman represented too many things, such as the direction of human evolution, super soldiers, and many more. Then, they discovered some of the things that the laboratory was researching. The two of them became more important in the eyes of the country. In this newly formed group, they made various hypotheses about the disappearance of the two of them, such as the remains of a prehistoric civilization, an alien spaceship, a legendary paradise, or hibernation. Hibernation was proposed by a biologist. He felt that, according to some of the information, the strength that the Empress displayed was completely unbearable for humans. Therefore, she had to hibernate every once in a while to recover her body. The Empress sat in the seat of honor, looking indifferent and dignified. Not far away sat Rinpochen and the head of the Public Security Bureau, Tai Yen. Two people stood in front of Yangxin Palace Hall. One was Ning Kaichin, the other was Zhu Qingjun. At this moment, even though Zhu Qingjun's face was pale, he looked indifferent and had completely disregarded life and death. Neither he nor Ning Kaichin felt that he could return alive. "What do you want?" the Empress looked at Ning Kaichin and asked. Ning Kaichin couldn't have specially sent Rinpochen over out of kindness. Ning Kaichin smiled shyly. "Actually, I don't want anything. After all, Deputy Prefect Ren and I hit it off at first sight. However, my spirit sword Green Pearl was seriously damaged this time and I need some materials to repair it. It would be great if the Empress of Deo could give me a handful of cloud crystals, or an appropriate amount of white dragon grass and stone marrow." Tai Yan's eyes were like knives as he stared at Ning Kaichin. Cloud crystals were considered rare treasures, and a handful of them could be exchanged for a city. Even though white dragon grass and stone marrow weren't as precious as cloud crystals, they were still very valuable. "You are really demanding an exorbitant price. You actually want to sell this person for the price of a city. I can't give you cloud crystals, but I will get someone to send you the white dragon grass and stone marrow later," the Empress said. Since someone had delivered the information that she wanted, she wouldn't be stingy with her rewards. As for whether it was worth it or not, according to the words in the television series that day, it didn't matter if it was worth it or not, it only depended on whether one wanted it or not. Soon after, Ning Kaichin was brought away. "Your Majesty, it's my fault." Tai Yen stood up and apologized. "You can collect your salary for 3 months. The Empress waved her hand. "As for this person, I will leave his corpse intact and bury him somewhere outside the city." The Empress's gaze drifted across Zhu Qingjun's body without a trace of emotion. Leaving his corpse intact was already on account of him telling her everything. "Your Majesty!" Rinpochen suddenly called out. "What's the matter?" The Empress looked at Rinpochen with a gentler gaze. "I would like to ask you a few questions." Rinpochen stood up and saw the Empress nodding. He then turned around and asked, "Since the Lien family knows that they have been exposed, will they still stay there?" In his heart, nothing was more important than his life. Especially things like wealth and status. If he died, he would lose everything. What about the Lien family? In order to suppress this matter, they didn't even hesitate to kill people to keep their mouths shut. What would they do now? Ning Kaichin had been here for a month. If they sent people over, they would have already run away. Lien Qiji should be there, and most of them won't leave either. After all, the Lien family is located in the hinterland of Great Xia. I'm afraid it won't be easy for you to send people there. However, they should arrange for a small number of young and talented people to leave and hide first. Zhu Qingjun looked at Rinpochen and then said faintly. Just like what he said, it wasn't easy for Deo to send people to the hinterland of Great Xia. The Lien family was located much deeper than the 9 pavilions. If it wasn't for the incident at the 9 pavilions, the Lien family wouldn't be so worried that Qi Zixia would go crazy again. As for the tens of thousands of casualties in Great Xia, it couldn't be blamed on the Lien family. On the contrary, the Lian family's incident this time even led Qi Zixiao to Great Xia. Therefore, the Lian family would at most find an opportunity to suppress them, but it wouldn't be too serious. I feel that the most important thing for a family is to be neat and tidy. If the Lian family can't be reunited, it would be too cruel. In order to ferret out the Lian family, we might need a husky. Renbachin cupped his hands and said to the Empress. The aboriginals were too conspicuous. It would indeed be troublesome to send people to Great Xia to exterminate the Lian family. Therefore, a mad dog that had a grudge against the Lian family couldn't be better. In any case, even if they failed, they wouldn't lose anything. As for implicating the entire family, he didn't feel any pressure at all. In the first place, they were the ones who attacked him first, so he couldn't be blamed. Just like the Jean family, there might be some among them who didn't do evil and didn't know anything about what happened to him. However, what they enjoyed was the money they earned from their evil deeds. If they succeeded, those people would also enjoy the money stained with their own blood. Since they became rich because of this, they couldn't blame them for suffering because of this. Moreover, if they didn't pull out the roots, wouldn't they be able to survive for the new year? Tai Yan looked at Renbachin with admiration and muttered something. The most important thing for a family is to be neat and tidy. These words are good and imposing. I have to memorize them. Chapter 265. Renbachin walked into the dimly lit prison. The warden carried a lantern and led the way while Su Wei followed closely behind. Renbachin walked with his legs splayed out. He had just returned from looking at the fields outside the city. Every time he rode a fork-horned cow, he would feel a burning pain in his inner thigh. These days, he had obtained some fields from other sources. Now, he had a total of 200 mu of land. After exchanging fields with others, he finally managed to gather 200 mu of land. After all, everyone still gave the Empress some face. Today, Renbachin went to take a look at the 200 mu of land. Tai Dao and Ting Hulu were in charge of it. They also hired more than 20 people, including women, children, and the elderly. However, these people were very strong. They were even stronger than the young and strong men on earth. Renbachin watched as they carried 2 buckets the size of a water tank with great strides. Previously, when he was injured and asked for forgiveness, he brought 2 bags of seasoning seeds which were only enough to sow 50 mu of land. Fortunately, the sesame seeds in the beast park were ripe and could sow 20 mu of land. The rest of the land was planted with sweet potatoes and other crops from this world. After walking one round in the fields, Renbachin returned to the city at noon and went to the prison to see Zhu Qingjun. Renbachin was rather familiar with this prison. A few months ago, he was thrown here when he first arrived. At that time, all he could think of was how to keep his head. Who would have thought that things would take a turn for the worse and end up like this? The prison was made of stone on both sides and had an iron door in the middle. There weren't many prisoners in the prison, so there wasn't much noise. There weren't any scenes of people knocking on the iron door and crying out for their grievances like those on television. Foreigners were usually beheaded after staying here for a few days. There weren't many aboriginals who were captured here. At most, they would get into fights and be released after being whipped. Theft and robbery were basically non-existent in Lon City. In Lon City, if you threw a brick and hit someone, that person might be an earth will expert. Open the door, I'll go in and take a look, Renbachin said when he reached the prison cell. The cell wasn't locked and there was only an iron bar stuck outside. The aboriginals were too strong and had too many experts. They were never afraid of a prison break. Even if they could, they wouldn't be able to escape. The prison cell was very dark with only a small window shining in. At this moment, Zhu Qingjuan's complexion looked much better. After he stopped drinking wine and eating those shrimps, the injury on his leg was almost healed within a few days. Renbochin stood at the door and looked at him. He also looked up at Renbochin. The warden stood in front of Renbochin to prevent him from suddenly going berserk. He had also heard of Deputy Prefect Ren's strength. How about it? I saved your life, didn't I? Shouldn't you repay me? Renbochin said with a smile. On that day, Zhu Qingjun knew that he probably wouldn't die. Although he was imprisoned, he had been waiting to settle the score with the Lian family. He even thought that the other party would say something. No matter what, as long as the target was the Lian family, he would agree. However, he didn't expect to hear such a reply, which made him a little stunned. I'm naturally willing to deal with the Lian family. But you won't believe me so easily, right? Zhu Qingjun said. That's easy. Just one poison will do. It's like a jelly bean. It won't affect anything if you eat it, and it tastes pretty good. After taking it, one would die if there was no antidote for a period of time. After taking the antidote, one would live. Isn't that simple? I feel that since the Lian family has treated you so badly, you won't seek your own death for the sake of the Lian family, Renbochin said. His voice was similar to those villains in his memory. In fact, what he did was similar to those villains. Zhu Qingjun laughed after hearing Renbochin's words. It's indeed very simple. Give me the poison. There's no hurry. I'm still making the poison. Ordinary poisons don't taste good. I spend a lot of effort to coat it with a layer of sugar without destroying its medicinal properties. You stay here for a few days first. I'll let you out after a few days when it's done. Renbochin waved his hand as though he was thinking for him. Zhu Qingjun laughed after hearing what Renbochin said. At this stage, who would still care about the taste of poison? Yet, the other party was wasting his time in such a place. I'm here today to see how you are. I'm relieved to see that you're fine. Renbochin nodded his head, turned around and left. Give him something good to eat. Don't let him starve. In fact, he didn't need to make poison. It was the job of the clinic. What he needed to do was to pack the sarin gas separately. It was too extravagant to throw the whole bottle out like before. He only had a few bottles left, so he had to use them sparingly. Moreover, if he threw the whole bottle out, not only the Lian family, but also the entire city, many people would die. By then, Great Xia would definitely be in an uproar. Renbochin felt that as a person, it was better to leave some leeway. There was no need to be so ruthless. The most important thing was that Great Xia still had so many experts, especially the top experts. Even though many of them didn't show up normally, poisoning a city to death was too ruthless. Who knew if a few of them would jump out to exterminate evil and defend justice? For example, that fairy like Li Yuanzhu. In any case, no matter who it was, he would be in big trouble. The guards by his side wouldn't be able to defend against such an expert. Renbochin returned to the palace. After lunch, he sat beside the Empress and accompanied her to watch The Legend of the Sword and Fairy 3. The Empress even asked a few times why there was no The Legend of the Sword and Fairy 2. Renbochin was at a loss. If the Empress asked him, who should he ask? When it was time to practice, Renbochin stood in the middle of the training ground. Tong Lan was still opposite him. She was the little Lolita with 2 buns on her head. Just like how the Empress liked red clothes, she liked white clothes. She wore white clothes every day. The only difference was that the flowers embroidered on her clothes were different. You have put on weight again. You are already 10 years old and should be married in a few years. You are so fat, who would dare to marry you? Renbochin trash-talked and looked for the other party's flaws. You are already an adult, but you can't even beat me. Don't you have any shame? Tong Lan was not polite at all. Her grandfather, Tong Jinya, had told her not to give him face and beat him up ruthlessly. Chance. Renbochin saw Tong Lan roll her eyes when she spoke and immediately pounced on her like a ferocious tiger. After a month of hard training, his strength had improved a lot. He could already withstand one move from the little Lolita. Bang! Renbochin lay on the ground and looked at the blue sky and white clouds. Over the past few days, he hadn't improved much in other aspects, but his ability to withstand beatings had improved tremendously. Furthermore, he didn't have the slightest bit of hesitation or retreat when fighting. His entire person was more spirited and had an indomitable aura. In the eyes of others, he was still a noob. However, Renbochin knew that he had improved a lot. He had already advanced from a level 1 noob to a level 2 noob. When he surpassed the level 9 noob and became a supreme noob, Renbochin felt that he would be able to defeat this 10-year-old Lolita. After thinking about it carefully, he didn't know why, but he felt like crying. Sigh. Such is life. After returning to Earth, Renbochin went to Vienna from Prague. Vienna was a famous music city with all kinds of concert halls. Renbochin and the Empress even specially went to listen to a classical concert. After that, their impression of the concert was that they slept soundly. When they returned, Renbochin had already decided that his next destination would be the fashion city, Milan. They will definitely go to Milan. In a certain department, more than one person thought of this. Arrange for a few people who are good at dealing with people to go there. The men shouldn't be too handsome and the women shouldn't be too beautiful, a psychologist suggested. Following which, he said with some regret, unfortunately, I don't meet the requirements. Chapter 266. Renbochin looked at the poisonous pill in front of him, which was the size of the fist of a 4 to 5-year-old child. His face was full of vigor, and his expression was clearly saying, "Are you kidding me? According to your request, take the antidote once every half a month. Otherwise, your intestines will rot and you will die. However, this is the limit for the size. The smell of one of the herbs is too strong, and it can't be concealed without a large amount of honey and a few other herbs. If the pill is too small, it won't have enough medicinal power. An Earthwill expert might not die from it." The doctor from the physician's bureau also had a look of disbelief on his face. He had never heard of anyone making this kind of poison that had to be sweet. Or this, the smell is too strong. The doctor took out another box and opened it. Renbochin smelled a strange smell that made him feel as if it was dug out from his foot. The pill inside was indeed much smaller than the 6-flavored Rehmannia pill that Renbochin had eaten before. "This is it. You have to keep your word. I told him it's sweet, so it has to be sweet." Renbochin immediately kept the box and turned to leave. He wasn't eating it anyway. "You have to swallow it whole," the doctor added slowly. Renbochin waved his arms with his back facing the doctor. Although the people around him were at least at the Earthwill level and didn't seem to be anything special. However, a second-rate aristocratic family in Great Xia only had a few Earthwill experts. Although the Earthwill level was divided into the initial, intermediate, advanced, and peak levels, an initial Earthwill expert could block bullets with a saber, jump 6 to 7 meters high, and have at least 1 to 2,000 kilograms of strength. On Earth, he was already considered a Superman. Zhu Qingjun was at the intermediate level of the Earthwill level and was even stronger. It was easy for him to swallow the pill, even if it was a little big. Renbochin asked someone to bring Zhu Qingjun to the palace. He sat in the garden of Pingle Park with a box on the stone table in front of him. When Zhu Qingjun was brought in, Renbochin was playing Plants vs. Zombies on his phone. "Wait, it will be ready soon." Renbochin looked at the phone screen nervously. After a while, he put down the phone and looked at the other party carefully. His cheeks were thin, his lips were thin, and his expression was cold. He gave off the feeling that he was a reliable person. He was dirty and had straw in his hair. However, he was much better off than Renbachien when he was only wearing a pair of underpants. He seemed to be in good spirits. There shouldn't be too much to say. You work for me, and I'll give you the antidote. If you do well, I will detoxify you. You're just an earth will expert, so I don't have to spend too much effort on you. Renbachien sized him up and nodded. Originally, Zhu Qingjun was still wondering what the thing in Renbachien's hand that could make a sound was. When he heard Renbachien's words, anger rose in his heart. Renbachien's words were indeed somewhat arrogant. With his strength, no matter where he went in Great Xia, he would be valued. When had he ever been looked down upon like this? However, after thinking about what he had seen over the past 2 days, even the prison warden was at the earth will level. All the imperial guards in the palace were at least at the earth will level. Renbachien couldn't help but sigh. The aboriginals had too much of an advantage. Originally, I could have arranged for anyone to do it. It's very easy to find someone to do it, but I felt that you would be able to drag out the people of the Lien family hiding in the underground cave, so I gave you this opportunity. You can live, and you can also take revenge. It's the best of both worlds. It's just a small deal between us. Once you're done, you can fly as high as you want, Renbachien continued. There are still a few earth will experts in the Lien family. Lien Qiji himself is close to an advanced earth will expert. It won't be easy for you to find someone to deal with them. Zhu Qingjun couldn't help but ask. Renbachien's words made him feel that he was worthless in the eyes of the other party. It's not that troublesome. Renbachien waved his hand and said, you can throw this small bottle in at night. It doesn't matter if you are a hooligan or a hooligan. When Zhu Qingjun saw the transparent bottle in Renbachien's hand, he suddenly remembered that even though Renbachien looked no different from an ordinary person, his name had spread far and wide in Great Xia. Commoners might not know much, but almost everyone with a bit of status knew. Poison warrior. He poisoned the 9 pavilions and tens of thousands of Dao's elite soldiers to death. Is that poison in his hand? 8 spirit will level pavilion masters of the 9 pavilions died under his poison. Even a spirit will expert couldn't withstand it, let alone an earth will expert. Indeed, the other party could have just found a random person to throw the bottle into the Lien family. No wonder the other party didn't care about him at all. At the thought of this, Zhu Qingjun felt slightly disappointed. A person's value needed to be recognized by others. When others denied your value, most people would feel disappointed. Alright, eat it, swallow it whole. Renbachien pushed the box in front of Zhu Qingjun. Zhu Qingjun opened the box and stared blankly. How could a child's fist be swallowed? This medicine is still very reliable. As long as you take the antidote regularly, you will definitely not die. If you don't take the antidote, you will definitely not survive. It won't act up prematurely or later. It's very stable. It's just a little big. I believe in you, there won't be any problem. Renbachien encouraged him. Zhu Qingjun closed his eyes and stuffed the pill into his mouth. Then, he continued to stuff it down. Renbachien saw that his throat was swollen, just like a snake swallowing a large prey. Seeing that Zhu Qingjun almost choked to death after swallowing the super big pill, Renbachien hurriedly asked someone to get him some water. It took him a long time to recover from his coughing. After that, Renbachien gave Zhu Qingjun half a year's worth of antidote, a small bottle of sarin gas, and a bottle of antidote. Finally, he gave Zhu Qingjun his contact details before letting someone bring him away. When Zhu Qingjun walked out of the palace, he suddenly felt that the sky was a little brighter. On the way to Dao, he thought that he would definitely die. He did not expect that not only would he be able to take revenge, but he would also have a chance to survive. No matter what, the first thing to do now was to take revenge. He had done so much for the Lien family, but in the end, he was silenced. He could not rely on the other party to keep his word. He had to find someone to see if the poison could be cured. Although he had to take revenge on the Lien family, the feeling of having his life and death ring in the hands of others wasn't pleasant either. No matter what, he was still an earth will expert. Now that he had survived, it was his instinct to want to control his own life. As long as he survived this time, he would definitely work hard in the future. He would work hard by hook or by crook. He would never be looked down upon like this again. The river flows east for 30 years, and the river flows west for 30 years. Do not bully the young for being poor. Zhu Qingjuan's indifferent face was filled with resolution and determination. Ren Baqian's words had more or less hurt his pride. Even if he could understand, he still couldn't let go of the other party's contempt. Oh, that Zhu Qingjun was drinking in a pub. Ren Baqian initially thought that Zhu Qingjun would leave immediately. He didn't expect him to find a place to drink first. Was this considered as a way to celebrate his survival? After that, he had a conflict with someone and was severely injured. If it wasn't for the people from the Public Order Bureau who arrived in time, I'm afraid he would have been beaten to death, the guard continued. Pfft. Ren Baqian spat out a mouthful of tea. It wasn't easy for him to save Zhu Qingjuan's life. Chapter 267. That night, Zhu Qingjun was quickly sent away from Lan City. Ren Baqian really didn't dare to let him stay here any longer. If he were to lose his mind and throw out that bottle of sarin gas, it would be fun to watch. However, Ren Baqian also thought of some other matters. After he returned, he wasn't in a hurry to exterminate the Lien family. Instead, he needed to locate the other members of the Lien family first. After all, although they were sent to other places, they still had some contact with the Lien family. If the Lien clan was exterminated first, those people might really conceal their identities and go into hiding. At that time, it would not be easy to dig out those rats. In any case, as long as this husky was sent back to Great Xia, everything else would have nothing to do with him. It would be best if he succeeded, but it didn't matter if he failed. However, he also felt that although the Aboriginals were very strong, there were many things that were really inconvenient. For example, if he had another group of people under him, he wouldn't have to go through so much trouble. Another example would be sending spies out. The Aboriginals had very few spies in the outside world. They completely relied on a small number of caravans, such as the 2 caravans of the royal family, to gather some information while traveling outside. There were also a few skinnier Aboriginals who looked more like ordinary Aboriginals from the other empires. However, the Aboriginals weren't good at this. Furthermore, the people from the other nations were also very wary of them, so it wasn't easy for them to gather information. Ren Baqian felt that the remnant citizens of the Han nation in the south were a good choice. However, he now counted the matters at hand. On one hand, there was the matter of the glass, and on the other hand, there was the matter of the well salt in the mountains that had not been dealt with. After these 2 matters were settled, he was prepared to make a trip to the south. However, the incident with the glass had caused Ren Baqian to pull out quite a lot of his hair. Looking at the hair on his pillow every day, Ren Baqian decided to shave his head bald. It was easy to remove the color of the glass as long as the iron in the glass was oxidized with potassium nitrate. Potassium nitrate was also relatively easy to obtain. However, the silver mirror reaction really made Ren Baqian want to vomit blood. He listed out all the silver reaction processes that he had found on the internet. First of all, ammonia was not available. Secondly, to obtain nitric acid, one needed nitrogen dioxide plus water, or sodium nitrate plus sulfuric acid. To make nitric oxide, however, you need nitric acid. As for sodium nitrate, he had yet to discover where it could be found in this world. After a long time, it turned out that to need eggs, there had to be chickens first. However, chickens still needed eggs to hatch. After Renbochin shaved his head bald, he started to scratch his scalp. Renbochin's scalp was about to be scratched off, but he couldn't do anything about it. Feeling helpless, he felt that it would be better for him to move from Earth to this world. Later on, when this world had the concept of chemistry, he would let them study it. I want to teach a few students, Renbochin suddenly said when he found the Empress. The Empress was a little surprised. She didn't expect him to have such a thought. Wasn't he afraid of trouble the most? These thoughts were practically written all over the Empress's face. There are some things that I have to do, but I don't even have enough time to spend on it. I feel that it's better to teach a few students so that I can relax in the future, Renbochin said helplessly. Every day, he had to spend half of his time practicing martial arts and doing all kinds of things. Renbochin felt that his time was definitely not limited to 24 hours. At the very least, he had much less time than others. The Empress first asked Hong Yuan and Qing Yuan to wait outside. After looking at Renbochin for a long time, she said, "Actually, I have always had this thought. Great Xia, the Yun nation, and the Qin nation all have their own national academies. However, there was no such place in Dao. Since you want to teach a few students, why don't you build an academy so that the aboriginals can have a place to learn some things? Originally, I wanted to discuss this matter at a later time. Since you have brought it up, why don't we do it this way?" Ah. Renbochin opened his mouth wide and was a little stunned. He only wanted to teach a few students so that they could help him do some things. Why did it suddenly become an academy? If it was a few days later, he might not necessarily object to it. However, he still had to practice martial arts every day. There was also the glass factory and the like. He also had to think about how to fill up the treasury of the palace. Where would he find the time? "Why, are you unwilling?" The Empress's expression changed in an instant. It wasn't ice cold, but yearning. Her eyes were filled with expectation. These few years, Dao has sent out many people, but they haven't been able to gain much. Even though the various officials in the imperial court have obtained some books from other nations, they aren't systematic and there is no one to teach them. As for the ordinary aboriginals, it is already very difficult for them to learn words, let alone other things. You have told me before that knowledge is power. In your world, countless ordinary people are the foundation. The geniuses born among them lead the direction of the entire world. Only then can they reach that stage. However, it is too difficult for my Dao to achieve this. As the Empress spoke, she got up from the couch and walked in front of Renbochin. She stared straight into Renbochin's eyes as if she wanted to see through his heart. "Only you can do this and let me see the scene that I want to see. In that case, are you willing to do this for me?" Her eyes were bright and her face was filled with expectation as she waited for Renbochin's answer. This wasn't the first time Renbochin saw such an expression. When he first arrived on Earth and looked at the brightly lit city, her expression was somewhat similar to this one. However, this was the first time the Empress showed such an expression to him. The distance between their faces was less than 10 centimeters. Renbochin could feel the heat that was transmitted to his body when she breathed. He could also smell the fragrance that was coming from her. He could even see himself in her eyes, which made his heart beat faster. "The direction that your gaze points to is the direction that I will advance in," Renbochin said gently. Upon hearing this, the Empress revealed a rare bright smile on her face. Following which, she returned to the couch with a smile on her face and said, "That's settled then. You will be in charge of the new school. As for the name, let's call it. I will leave the honor of naming it to you." The Empress seriously considered for a while and realized that she actually couldn't think of a suitable name. She immediately handed over the responsibility of naming it to Renbochin. Renbachien looked at the Empress's triumphant expression and the smile at the corner of her mouth. Then, he thought about her expression and tone that didn't match her character. He felt that the Empress had learned bad things from those period dramas. Indeed, he had opened the door to a new world for the Empress. However, they have to start from learning how to read, Renbachien said bluntly. Originally, he wanted to translate the words from Earth into the words of this world. At this moment, he simply changed his mind and let them start from simplified Chinese. You can make the arrangements. I hope to see a batch of real talents emerge from it, the Empress said. I'll do my best. Renbachien thought for a while. Those who had received basic education should be considered talents in Dayo. He would pick out a few who were smarter, quick-witted, and could accept new things to learn more things. They would then be his assistants. What about the students? How do we recruit them? Not all of the children in the imperial court are gifted. Those who aren't gifted will be sent to the school, the Empress said while scratching her chin. Renbachien spread his hands. Just now, the Empress made it sound as if she had pinned all her hopes on this school. In the end, it would become a shelter for useless people. However, those who were gifted would definitely focus on practicing martial arts. After all, this world wasn't Earth. In the end, martial arts were still the most important. Even though martial arts couldn't solve all problems, it could solve most of them. Chapter 268. In the throne room, Tong Zhenye, you old man, do you want to taste the sharpness of this old man's saber? Qin Chuan's eyes were like two copper bells, and his voice was so loud that it could lift the roof. Ever since he heard this from somewhere, everyone's ears had grown calluses. Humph, Master Qin, do you think I'm afraid of you? Last time at House Yunyan, I don't know who fell into the puddle afterward. Tong Zhenye had a faint smile on his face. Pfft. Many people burst out laughing. The last time they fought at the top of the brothel, both sides were supposed to be tied. In the end, Qin Chuan's wife shouted from below. At that time, Qin Chuan was caught unprepared and was kicked into a puddle in the neighboring courtyard by Tong Zhenye. Qin Chuan regarded this matter as a great humiliation. He didn't expect that Tong Zhenye would use this to provoke him at this time. He was so angry that his eyes turned red, and he slammed into Qin Chuan. In an instant, there was almost an afterimage behind him. Qin Chuan was already prepared. He punched out with both fists, one above and one below. Just like that, the two of them started fighting in the throne room. The people around them were already used to this kind of thing. Lord Qin's Black Tiger Steel's heart move is really quick. Mr. Qin, it's Black Tiger Steel's heart again. Mr. Qin, it's still Black Tiger Steel's heart. Everyone nodded in disgust. If Renbachien were here, his eyeballs would have popped out. Was Dayo's court assembly like this? Minister of War, what the hell are you doing with the words Black Tiger digging out heart, and a Black Tiger digging out heart? And Tong Zhenye, where are you kicking? There's even a kick to the groin. The Empress sat in the seat of honor with one hand resting on her chin. She was bored to death as she watched the two of them fight. She was thinking about Hua Qinggu, whom she had seen last night. After a long while, the Empress sat up slightly and looked to her left and right. Suddenly, her eyes lit up. She picked up two red objects that were about 7 inches long, 3.5 inches wide, and 3 inches thick. She weighed them in her hand and then flew them toward the two of them with a whistling sound. You're right. Paw. Paw. The two objects smashed into the two men's heads and immediately broke into pieces. The two men patted the dust off their heads and turned to look for the source of the hidden weapons. Then, they cupped their hands and greeted, Your Majesty. Almost every time, it would end like this. There's one more thing. I'm going to set up a school in the next few days. If there are any suitable descendants in your families, you can send them over. The Empress wiped her hands after throwing the brick away. Then, she cupped her chin and said, "Academy." Everyone was stunned. I've heard of academies, but the other 3 countries have them. However, this was the first time in Dayo. Your Majesty, who is in charge of the academy? Shi Qing asked as he shook his sleeves. Opening a school was a good thing, but who would teach them? Ren Baqian, Deputy Prefect Ren, the Empress said faintly. Everyone was stunned for a moment, then asked, Your Majesty, what kind of disciple do you want? Smart and quick-witted, don't be too old, the Empress said faintly. This was requested by Ren Baqian. They were too old and difficult to teach. Their worldview had already been formed. However, they couldn't all be too young. If they were 7 or 8 years old, they would have to learn for 10 years before they could use them. It would be best if some of them were 15 or 16 years old. After 2 or 3 years of study, they would be of use. As for the younger ones, we can slowly nurture them. After hearing the Empress's request, everyone nodded in agreement. They didn't know if Ren Baqian had the ability to do so. Anyway, he had a lot of strange things in his hands. Since Her Majesty had spoken and the matter of the academy wasn't a big deal, everyone naturally wouldn't object. However, it was another matter if there were any suitable disciples in the family. At this point in time, Ren Baqian had also seen the location of the academy. It was just beside the palace. On one side of the palace was a beast park and on the other side was a martial arts training ground. The main purpose was for the Imperial Guards to practice martial arts during their shifts. It was more than 200 meters long and 100 meters wide. There were many huge rocks like the ones Ren Baqian saw Xiong Pai playing with before. There were also various kinds of stone locks and some wooden stakes that were as thick as the mouth of a bowl and about 2 meters tall. Ren Baqian saw an Imperial Guard that he had seen before standing 150 meters away with a bow. The guard shot an arrow and the wooden stake, which was as thick as the mouth of a bowl, broke into 2. This power was equivalent to that of a sniper rifle. There was an empty space beside this martial arts training ground. It was slightly smaller than the martial arts training ground. It had never been used and had long been overgrown with weeds. Next to this empty space was a forest. The location of the academy was this deserted empty space. Ren Baqian walked one round here and had a plan in mind. In any case, there wouldn't be many students and he wouldn't have the time to teach even if there were more. He just had to build a courtyard and a few rooms. In Ren Baqian's mind, 30 to 40 students would be enough. However, it was time to return to Earth. These things could be discussed after they returned. Zixiao, let's go and rob. Ren Baqian said to the Empress with a serious face, Look, there's only 25,000 left. It had been 4 months since they had fled, but they had only been on Earth for slightly more than a month. The original 1 million yuan was worth more than 120,000 euros. Even though they didn't have many accommodations during this trip to Europe, the Empress still spent 100,000 yuan in 1 month. It was faster than what Ren Baqian had expected. Furthermore, this was Milan, the famous fashion capital. He was afraid that the 2 of them would be penniless when they left this place. It was easy to find a target. He heard that there were many mafias in Italy. After hearing Ren Baqian's words, the Empress seriously considered it. She hesitated for a moment between shopping and robbing. After about a second, she looked at Ren Baqian and nodded, okay. Pfft. Ren Baqian almost laughed out loud. The serious expression on the Empress's face when she seriously considered this matter was really too interesting. What are you laughing at? The Empress squinted her eyes and looked at him. Robbing didn't give her any psychological burden. Today, a large portion of Dayo's weapons were looted when they attacked the Yun nation in the early years. Needless to say, the entire Dao was looted. I think it should be like this. Everything under the heavens belongs to the king. What belongs to them belongs to you, your majesty. Renbochin had a serious look on his face. Saying it this way sounded more elegant. The Empress thought about it again. Pow! Renbochin looked at his pig-trotter-like hand with a hidden bitterness on his face. Your Majesty, when did you learn to fight like this? The two of them weren't in a hurry to buy anything. Instead, they strolled around the city. The Roman, Gothic, and Renaissance buildings that could be seen everywhere piqued their interest. When they arrived at the square of the Milan Cathedral, the Empress took a few more glances at the magnificent buildings in the distance. This kind of Gothic architecture always attracted people's attention at first glance. Under the blue sky, the cathedral, the square, the tourists on the square, and the pigeons that could be seen everywhere formed a beautiful picture. When the two of them walked on the square, a flock of pigeons flew past them. A big black man placed a handful of pigeon food in Renbochin's hand. Immediately, a few pigeons flew towards Renbochin as if they had found their target. One of them pecked at his hand. Renbochin smiled and scattered the food in his hand. Immediately, a flock of pigeons flew around the two of them. A few people at the side couldn't help but take out their mobile phones to take pictures of the lady in red who was surrounded by pigeons. As for Renbochin, he was treated as a backdrop. When the pigeons landed, the big black man stretched out his hand with a smile on his face and said, "Money." Renbochin looked at him and laughed. This was the usual routine of these people. First, they would stuff a handful of pigeon food in your hand and let you enjoy the feeling of being surrounded by pigeons. Then, they would ask for money. If you didn't give money, then very soon, 3 to 5 big black men would appear. Furthermore, these people mainly targeted people with yellow skin. Get lost. Renbochin maintained his smile, but his tone was filled with contempt. He had already calculated that when the big black man's helpers arrived, he would take them down together. Then, he and the Empress would randomly find a remote place, and then these people would follow them and give them money. Although the money might not be a lot, the wealth of a millionaire was also accumulated over time. They couldn't just give up on picking up the pigeons just because they didn't have much money. After all, they had to specifically find suitable targets to rob. Now, they just had to bend over and pick up the pigeons. Sure enough, after a whistle, 4 tall and strong big black men immediately surrounded the two of them. They were mumbling something and had a threatening expression on their faces. Renbochin snapped his fingers, and the Empress looked at him with dissatisfaction. There are too many people, and there are so many people watching. Renbochin smiled shyly and pointed to the surroundings. They only felt a gust of wind blow past them. In the next second, the 4 of them cried out in pain and fell to the ground. No one present could see what exactly happened. The Empress's movements were too fast. Renbochin timely put on a shocked expression and said, "You guys actually faked falling." However, just as he shouted this, he saw a few people take off their coats, revealing their police uniforms. Chapter 269. We are the Federal Police. May I ask if they threatened you? After a few Italian police officers surrounded them, one of them pointed at the people at his feet and asked Renbochin. It was in Italian. Renbochin was at a loss. He looked at the ID that the other party flashed and thought for a while. He should be saying that we have defeated someone and wants us to follow them to the police station? Which eye of his saw us hitting people? Renbochin didn't know if he was talking to himself or to the Empress, but he sounded a little doubtful. Renbochin knew his situation very well. Both of them did not even have passports and were burdened with cases. If they were to enter the police station, they would have no choice but to fight their way out. There was no need to enter the police station. With a few more questions from the police, the two of them would give themselves away. He would have to kill his way out sooner or later, so it was better to strike first and gain the upper hand. It was a pity that he had only been in Milan for half a day and had yet to take a look around. Damned fishing law enforcement. Ranbachin cursed in his heart. All of a sudden, he leaped up and stomped his feet on the ground. In an instant, he appeared in front of the police officer and gave him a tight slap on his ear. Ranbachin's current strength was around 330 kilograms, which was considered quite strong. That police officer did not even have the chance to groan before he was smashed to the ground like a wooden stake. The police officers were stunned by the sudden turn of events. What was going on? The rest of them hurriedly reached for their holsters, but before they could pull out their guns, they were all sent flying. The onlookers were also stunned. A middle-aged man in the crowd had a satisfied look on his face. He had sent people to monitor the route from the north to Milan, and sure enough, the two of them had arrived. He had guessed their route and destination, so he had come here in advance to wait for them. Knowing that the two of them were extremely vicious, he was afraid that they would get into trouble again. He even hired a few Italian police officers to help them clean up the mess. This was to prevent the two of them from escaping after committing a crime like they did in Japan. This could be considered as a sign of his sincerity. However, he had guessed the beginning correctly, but not the ending. When he saw Ranbachin suddenly slap the police officer, the expression on his face froze in an instant. In the next second, the police officers were all lying on the ground, unconscious. He almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Don't you feel any pressure at all when you openly attack a police officer? Do you still have a little bit of conscience? Can't you guys share the good stuff? Are you going to fight all over the world? Did they really think that the country was useless? Well, some countries in Europe were indeed incompetent. The middle-aged man looked like he was about to vomit blood. Seeing that Ranbachin and Gu Shizhou were about to leave, he hurriedly chased after them and asked, "Can I have a word with you too?" Ranbachin and the Empress ignored him, turned around, and left. The people around them made way for the two of them. That middle-aged man chased Ranbachin for half a street. Ranbachin suddenly stopped, and his hand was already on his waist. The middle-aged man was startled by Ranbachin's actions. He consciously raised his hands to show that he had no ill intentions and said, "I'm here to help you." Ranbachin pulled up his pants and grinned at him, revealing a mouthful of white teeth. "I'm here to help you. Can we talk? I'm not representing myself." "You know what I mean," the middle-aged man said quickly, afraid that the other party would lose their minds. "I'm not free," Ranbachin replied. "If the two of you are worried about the Italian police, our men will take care of those police officers," the middle-aged man continued. When Ranbachin heard this, he felt that it was somewhat interesting. "They are the undercover agents that you planted here." Ranbachin's face was full of vigor. The middle-aged man almost spat out a mouthful of blood. "Recently, we have done a lot of things to help you clean up the mess you left behind. Otherwise, do you think that the Japanese police wouldn't be able to find out about the two of you?" The middle-aged man continued and pointed to a coffee shop by the roadside. "The two of you, sit down and have a chat." Ranbachin looked at the Empress, but she didn't care about this at all. Her gaze was focused in the distance. Ranbachin followed her gaze and saw a bright display window. There was a floral skirt paired with a red top. "All right, you look more pleasing to the eye than the previous few." Ranbachin nodded. In any case, the other party had helped him clean up a lot of messes. Furthermore, he didn't have much money on hand. If they could come to an agreement, would he be able to transfer the 20 million yuan to Qin? After a while, the three of them sat in the coffee shop. "Let me introduce myself first. My surname is Qin Shi," the middle-aged man introduced himself. At the same time, he sized up the two of them. Ren Baqian, male, 25 years old, Han Chinese, graduated from SY University, then worked at SY Zhongqing Trading Company for 8 months. All the information was clearly remembered in his mind. However, at this moment, Ren Baqian looked completely different from the delicate and slightly reserved young man in the photo. Compared to the photo, he was much more robust, bald, and gave off a very strange vibe. On one hand, he didn't seem to care much about anything. On the other hand, he gave off a very sharp vibe. At the same time, there was a little shadow of his previous self. As for the other person, Qi Zixiao, female, unknown, other than her name and gender, everything else was unknown. It was as if she had popped out from a crack in a rock. After all, for a person like her, it was impossible to hide her looks, temperament, and strength. Especially when she was sitting there without saying a word, she gave off a little pressure. It was as if she was someone who held the power of life and death for a long time. It was impossible for such a person to have popped out from a crack in a rock. However, he couldn't find any information about her. It was a complete blank. It was these two people who had committed so many crimes in their country. After escaping to our nation, they didn't restrain themselves at all. Along the way, they went sightseeing and committed murder after murder. In their eyes, human life was like grass. According to the recent investigation, a murder in Austria should be related to these two people. Oh. Ren Baqian nodded and stirred his cup with a small spoon. The Empress hugged her yogurt and slurped it in small mouthfuls. Qinshe waited for a long time, but the two of them didn't have any intention to continue the conversation. He looked slightly helpless. "Those Italian police officers just now were helping you," Qinshe finally said. "Oh, I thought they were arresting us," Ren Baqian said innocently. Qinshe looked at Ren Baqian's innocent expression and felt his chest tighten. "Couldn't you have asked more? There were so many people around. As long as you opened your mouth, someone would immediately tell you what they were talking about. Furthermore, I was standing right beside you. Who would have thought that you would make a move in front of so many people without saying a word? I knew that you would stir up trouble here. I specially bribed a few police officers to help me clean up the place. I was afraid that you would stir up trouble again," Qinshe said with a sullen face. Ren Baqian nodded. He thought that the police and robbers had encountered a fishing expedition. "However, you are disturbing me from picking up money." Seeing that Ren Baqian was indifferent and Qi Zixiao was focused on drinking yogurt, Qinshe felt even more sullen. "How much work have we done for you? Bribing the Italian police and interfering with our nation's investigation. We have done all these things that we shouldn't have done. Don't the two of you know what to do?" If it was someone else, he would have already slammed the table. However, he really didn't dare to do so in front of these two people. The other party would definitely turn hostile and leave. He didn't know how long it would take to find them again. If he angered them, they would shoot him and continue to escape. He believed that they would definitely do such a thing. These two people were extremely daring. Chapter 270. Let's get down to business, Qinshe cleared his throat and said seriously. "Both of you aren't going to continue like this, are you? If not for someone helping you deal with the loose ends, I'm afraid both of you wouldn't be so relaxed now." The Empress sneered when she heard this. After staying in this world for so long, she really didn't think that anyone could do anything to her. Although there were indeed powerful weapons in this world, she wasn't a blockhead. Most importantly, if she wanted to kill someone, who could escape? Most importantly, she didn't belong to this world at all. Qinshe knew what Qi Zixiao was thinking when he saw his expression, but he didn't mind. Instead, he said, "Both of you think the country is too simple. Perhaps conventional means can't do anything to you, but there are many unconventional means. If necessary, for example, if our nation finds out that you are different, they may not use too much force, but other means are hard to defend against. For example, poisonous gas, chemical incapacitating agents, infrasonic weapons, there are too many. Now, it's no longer the world where individual strength is supreme. There are too many new weapons that are hard to defend against. Perhaps it's difficult to equip the entire army or use them on the battlefield, but it's possible to deal with a small number of targets. To put it simply, every bite of food you eat may contain something that can threaten you. For a cake like this, perhaps only the middle layer had a little bit of something. You won't even know how you got hit. The Empress stuffed the cake into her mouth expressionlessly. Ranbaqian thought about it carefully. Part of what Chinshur said was right. One should not underestimate the power of a nation. The power that any nation could mobilize was unimaginable to them. However, other things were easier said than done. However, there was one thing. If there was an opportunity, he and the Empress would be in big trouble. Although there were a lot of people who fled and lived freely in other countries for decades, the premise was that the country didn't really care about them. If the country really cared about a person, then what Chinshur said might happen. One could be a thief for 1,000 days, but one couldn't guard against thieves for 1,000 days. It was impossible for him and the Empress to not relax at all, unless they ran to a desolate and uninhabited place. Then, they had to be careful of a bomb that dropped from their heads. Of course, the Empress wasn't someone to be trifled with. If she wanted to kill someone, unless that person wasn't on Earth, no one could escape. Therefore, both sides were afraid of each other. But the most important thing was that he wasn't prepared to keep floating outside. Previously, they had no choice but to run away. If they had the chance to live a stable life, no one would choose to run away. In fact, he and the other party hit it off very well. Furthermore, I believe that there must be a reason behind your escape this time. Judging from your previous actions, you did not rely on your strength to challenge the law or affect social order. We've also investigated the Jean family and learned some of their style. There must be a reason why they appeared in your house. As for your temperament, we have more or less understood it, Chinshur said to Ranbaqian. He did understand a little. In those cases in Japan, almost all of the victims were skinheads, ultranationalists, and almost all of them had various criminal records. If no one provoked the two of them would not make trouble out of nothing. However, if someone provoked the two of them, there was nothing they wouldn't dare to do. Just like what had been said before, their guts were boundless. At least, that was the case before. If Chinshur hadn't found the two of them in Milan, he probably wouldn't have thought this way after a few days. Ranbaqian looked at the other party's words. Since the other party had already built a ladder for him, of course, he had to step down. He immediately put on an aggrieved expression. He was almost at the point of perfection in changing his expression. Who did I provoke at home? I stayed at home obediently, but trouble came from the sky. Not only did that Jean Jun rob me of my shares, but he also threatened me with my family. I was also forced to do so. What was that saying again? When an ordinary man gets angry, blood will splash 5 steps away. Then, you exterminated the entire Jean family. Chinshur smiled bitterly. This was really a case of an ordinary man getting angry. It's not like you don't know what kind of style they have. They had already threatened me with the lives of their family. When I saw this, if calling the police was useful, they wouldn't be alive and kicking. They are rich and powerful, while I am just a little *tch. I thought about it and decided to sacrifice me for the happiness of thousands of families. Ranbaqian had a look of, I didn't want to do this, but I had no choice. Chinshur was stunned when he heard this. This fellow really knew how to back down. However, it was much easier for him to speak this way. No matter what, murder is still a big crime. However, the nation is very interested in some of the things that you have shown and is willing to give you a chance. The Empress raised her eyebrows and squinted her eyes. Give me a chance. The table under her hand immediately broke into a pile of broken pieces, and everything on the table fell to the ground. When Renbachien saw the Empress open her mouth, he knew something was wrong. He immediately retracted his leg and was unscathed. On the other hand, Chen Shi was spilled with coffee all over his pants. Fortunately, the coffee wasn't too hot anymore. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. He was sweating profusely. The main reason he was sweating was because of the aura emitted by Qi Zixiao just now. It made him unable to move, and his heart was beating wildly. It was as if it was about to explode. Before this, he had never thought that a person's aura could be so terrifying. Boss, the quality of the table is too poor. Renbachien turned his head and shouted. Chen Shi was speechless. After a while, the three of them changed to another corner. I remember that you said that you wanted to cooperate. Renbachien said faintly. Now, all the grievances on his face had disappeared. His expression was similar to that of the Empress, plain and a little cold. It can also be considered a cooperation. Chen Shi immediately changed the topic. This guy's expression really changed at a whim. Tell me about the specifics, Renbachien continued. For example, some of the things in your hands, the laboratory of you and Qin Yan. I think you have other things in your hands that are very valuable. For example, the skills of this person. I'm very curious. Are there really legendary cultivators in this world? If so, can they be imparted to others? There are a lot of things that the nation is interested in. I think there are a lot of things that you can give up. In fact, they don't even affect you. At this point, Chen Shi's eyes were a little fervent. Renbachien gently tapped his fingers on the table. In that case, what can we get? We can write off everything that happened in the past, suppress the domestic affairs, and revoke the arrest warrant. However, there is a prerequisite. You can't act so recklessly and must abide by the law. At the same time, if you have any other requests, you can raise them. I will report to the higher-ups, Chen Shi continued. Chen Shi thought for a while and spoke again. Also, did you say Emperor just now? I'm very curious about this person's identity. Just now, the Empress said, give me a chance. In this half a day, he had thought of all kinds of possibilities, but from the tone and the content of the words, he felt that it was Emperor. He felt that there might be a huge secret behind it, and this made him a little excited. The Empress turned her head to look at Renbachien, then turned her head to the other side to admire the oil painting on the wall. Renbachien was silent for a while. Then, he lowered his voice and slowly said, since you have sensed it, then I will say it directly. Actually, she is Wu Zetian. Back then, she gave up the throne to cultivate. Now that she has returned from her cultivation, everything in the world has become smoke. However, she still has 1 million soldiers. The nation will lend us 100 million first, and after we unfreeze the 1 million soldiers. Chen Shi looked as if he had eaten *T. Renbachien pondered for a while. What should he do with 1 million soldiers? He couldn't possibly rebel, right? These words couldn't be said carelessly. After that, we can make a Tang Dynasty terracotta army or something. Chapter 271. Forget about the million-strong army. As for the rest, you can guess if I'm telling the truth. Renbachien spread his hands and said. Chen Shi's mind was filled with the word emperor. Those who could say this word were either delusional or... He didn't dare to think about it. If it was someone else, he would have given them a slap. However, the Empress's strength made him overthink. After all, from the current information, the Empress's strength wasn't something a human could achieve. From the video, her speed was twice as fast as a human falling from the sky. It was hard to see her figure clearly and had to be played in slow motion. In other words, a normal person fell from the sky at about 23 meters per second, but she fell at more than 70 meters per second. That was a little more than a second to cover 100 meters. Imagine a person who was 100 meters away 1 second and appeared in front of you in the next. For an ordinary person, it was like teleportation, and they wouldn't be able to react within a short distance. Not to mention, the Empress didn't slow down after carrying Renbochin. She stepped on the wall and leaped to another building that was 100 meters away. This showed that she was even more powerful. This kind of speed and jumping force wasn't something a human could achieve. Correspondingly, how strong was she? If she was a cultivator, Chen sure would believe it. If she was a cultivator, how long had she lived? What was her true identity? Chen sure didn't even dare to think about it. It was really terrifying to think about it. Renbochin looked at Chen Shu's grave face and was pondering the pros and cons of saying this. If the other party really thought that the Empress was a cultivator, it wasn't that he couldn't produce a secret manual. The secret manuals of Great Xia were enough for them to chew on for a while. Moreover, the lifespan of an Earth Will expert would indeed increase. An Earth Embryo expert could live up to 100 years, and a Spirit Will expert could live up to 150 years. There was an even higher level above the Spirit Will realm, which was comparable to the Aboriginals' longevity heaven. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that it was a cultivation technique. At the same time, there was an advantage to saying this, which was that the things in his hands could be explained. Otherwise, there were many things that couldn't be explained. As for whether or not it would be exposed, it would have to wait until someone on Earth reached the Spirit Will realm. Renbochin believed that martial arts wouldn't be widely disseminated in a short period of time. Given the small number of people who practice martial arts, it would take a long time for someone to reach the Spirit Will level. If Renbochin didn't remember wrongly, Great Xia's cultivation technique also required some rare treasures. Was there really someone on Earth who could reach the Spirit Will level? Moreover, he was not worried that someone on Earth would cultivate to an extremely high level. On the contrary, if Earth could really find a way to cultivate to a very high level, it was not necessarily a bad thing for him. Perhaps he could push himself to a higher level. Otherwise, he really doubted how far he would be able to go on his own. After all, he was unable to cultivate other techniques, and no one knew what the re-visualization technique was like. Even though he could smoothly advance to the Earth Will level, there was still a barrier after that. If he were to stop at the Earth Will level, the lifespan of an Earth Will expert was only 100 years. At the same time, because he had traveled between two worlds, due to the difference in the flow of time, his lifespan might be shorter than those who had always been in the other world. The Empress could live to 200 years old, and if she broke through to longevity heaven, she could live to 300 years old. This was very likely. As for whether this would pose a threat to him, he had never worried about this problem. He had the backing of a world, and he would also be rich and powerful on Earth. No matter how bad his situation was, it wouldn't be too bad. It was much better than if he were to stop at the Earth Will level in the future. At the thought of this, he had an idea and was prepared to make a big lie. Of course, he had to do it bit by bit. No one would cherish things that came too easily. Chen Shi, who was sitting opposite him, pondered for a long time before raising his head and asking, "What other requests do you have?" "You can raise them all at once. I will report to the higher-ups together." "Money. Give me 100 million euros first. I have no money to spend. If you didn't come, I was prepared to rob someone." Renbochin spread his hands on the table and finally spoke the truth. Chen Shi pondered for a while. When Renbochin ran away, he brought 1 million euros with him, which was only slightly more than 100,000 euros. If he was a little extravagant, it would be gone very quickly. How would the two of them make money after that? Work. To quote a famous saying, it was impossible to work, not even in this lifetime. If the two of them could find a place to work and earn money, he would tear off his head and kick it like a ball. In that case, he was afraid that it would really be like what the other party said. At the thought of this, Chenshur didn't know whether to laugh or cry. These two people really made him speechless. Forget about 100 million. The country's money doesn't come from nowhere. I can help you settle the domestic affairs. You seem to have money with someone else, right? I don't even have money, how can I cooperate? Ren Baqian retorted. Chenshur was speechless. He had to admit that the other party was really a bastard. He was representing the country. Could he not be so straightforward? What can you offer in exchange for cooperation? Chenshur emphasized the word cooperation. Some rare and precious treasures. Ren Baqian pondered about the things from that world. Many of them should be considered rare and precious. After all, they were things from another world. As for whether they were rare or not, he could just change to something else. Furthermore, he still had a killer weapon, the elongation saber. Although this saber was a little weak and would break at the slightest touch, this didn't mean that the elongation saber was worthless. If it could be researched, imagine soldiers fighting with daggers and bayonets and suddenly growing 2 meters. Furthermore, with Earth's technology, they might not necessarily be able to research anything from it. For example, 1 kilogram of iron becoming 1 kilogram of iron. 1 kilogram of gold becoming 1 kilogram of gold. 1 barrel of oil becoming 2 barrels. If she is really an immortal cultivator, will the martial arts of immortality work? Chenshur asked the question that he was most concerned about. You can't become fat in one go. As for cooperation, let's do it bit by bit. Ren Baqian didn't reject and left some hope for the other party. I need to report to the higher-ups. Please wait a moment. Chenshur gestured to the two of them and stood up to leave. After he left, the Empress turned her head and asked, Who is Wu Zetian? The only female Empress in history, the most famous woman, and much more powerful than most men. Ren Baqian was spouting nonsense just now and hurriedly explained to the Empress now. I am myself. I don't need to impersonate anyone, and no one can be compared to me. The Empress looked unhappy. If it was someone else, she would have smashed him into a meat patty. Of course. It's just that you can't tell them about your identity, and they have no way of knowing. You are the most unique one. No one can be compared to you, be it in the past or in the future. Just like the words on the mirror, Ren Baqian comforted her softly. The Empress naturally knew that her identity couldn't be revealed in this world. After hearing what he said, she ignored him and turned her dissatisfaction into appetite. She ordered another serving of dessert. After waiting for a while, Chenshur hurriedly returned. After sitting down, he said, Someone wants to talk to you. The Europe trip hasn't ended yet. Ren Baqian waved his hand. A video call will do, Chenshur said. Ren Baqian nodded. Let's go to another place. At the same time, we also want to know how strong she is and how strong she is. After all, there are many things that we need to see with our own eyes before we can be at ease. Ren Baqian looked at the Empress. Even though there wasn't much change in her expression, he could imagine that she was very unhappy. He moved closer to her and whispered, Mortals, let me show you my strength. You should have this kind of thought. His breath tickled the Empress's ear and her body trembled a little. However, after hearing his words, she felt that it wasn't that hard to accept. She just felt that this sentence was indescribably shameful. Chenshur made a phone call first. After a while, when the three of them went out, there was already a car waiting outside. Before getting into the car, Renbochin whispered to the Empress, "Don't use your full strength, just show a little bit of strength." The Empress waved her hand. She didn't need Renbochin to say this. In fact, her other state was her true strength. Renbochin didn't know about this, and not many people knew about it. Hua Sanlu knew about it, but he was already dead. The 8 pavilion masters were dead as well. The 2 disciples who barely survived couldn't tell anything about the Empress's condition. After a while, everyone appeared outside the city at a remote place. After getting out of the car, Qinshe fiddled with his laptop for a while and pointed the screen at the 2 of them. On the other side of the screen was a middle-aged man wearing glasses. He looked very dignified, but he shouldn't be the main character. Renbochin guessed that the main character was still at the back. "We want to take a look at the authenticity first, then we will discuss some issues," the middle-aged man said. The Empress and Renbochin looked at each other. In a split second, the Empress appeared 50 to 60 meters away and lifted her leg. Boom! There was a rumbling sound. Even through the screen, they could feel the ground trembling. The ground around the Empress, which was at least 200 to 300 square meters, was all cracked and the stones under the soil were protruding. Regardless of whether it was Qinshe, the other world, or the person on the other side of the screen, everyone was stunned. It was one thing to guess it, but another to see it with their own eyes. Regardless of whether it was appearing 50 to 60 meters away in a split second or the power of this kick, it was shocking. Especially the power of this kick. It didn't seem to cover a large area, but one had to remember that this was land. Normally, if this kick was very powerful, it would be like a pile driver directly nailing it into the ground. However, the Empress covered the entire area with her power and used it on a single surface. Furthermore, it wasn't a flat surface that was pressed down, but the ground was uprooted. Just the method of using this power was already beyond imagination. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.